right.
You know what time it is, partner.
Yep. Welcome to Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 93, was it? 93, 94? Some crazy number. And it's a late one.
Mm-hmm.
It's into the dark days of almost winter. And yeah, we had Dustin over. We've been chatting. We've been chilling, getting distracted.
And unfortunately, probably drove him away.
Yeah, all better sometimes sooner than later, because if we're not going to start streaming, right?
Yeah.
Although it was just a rehash of the Jordan Peterson thing, so pardon, not a big deal.
I got tripped up by objective reality there a little bit.
Ideological
It was not objective.
confrontation.
So not objective.
Yeah, but there's lots of strategies for communicating with people.
It's weird how like something like an objective reality is like such a subjective phenomenon to begin with. Not in the sense that it doesn't like actually exist, I mean, a new agey thing, but more like, yeah, you can talk about it, but everything you're going to be saying about it and whatnot is subjective to you. Things that you've interpreted, things that you've encountered yourself, not necessarily the. So I mean, I'm just saying, like, it's not like it doesn't exist.
The idea of objective reality is something formulated through the spectrum of stupidity, as we call it.
In a way, yeah.
The discussion of or assumption of reality.
Or using it like
what is real.
So perhaps back to our topic, conspiracy theory of the axiology.
Mm-hmm.
For example, valuing reality as a top thing in your value system, right?
As primacy of what's real over what's moral, where moral can take a primacy on the other end of the spectrum. What's moral as what exists.
So if you build your ego stacks, the hierarchical structures, right? The top one can show up as your reality or as your morality, the highest level of achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm just loosely thinking about this.
Interesting, yeah, it would seem to make sense. The highest value, highest ideal.
Mm-hmm. So the highest ideology is either moral or real, right. And the conspiracy in this sense would be to place it at the top. And it's not, again, a conspiracy formulated by any specific tyrant or something like that. It's a hijacking of your ego.
This is why we call it the axiological conspiracy. Axiological.
The axiology is the conspirator.
The value, the logic of value, or the automation of value.
And the transitioning of every symbolic representation into a value.
So all values become filtered through a lens of either real being the highest or moral being the highest.
Or some mixture, yeah. Because there's 4 quadrants, right? Like there's ones that are extreme, but the ones in the middle simply gravitate towards more towards the one than the other. And so you have more of a breathing room, if you will, for more kinds of situations. So philosophizing is like taking reality and morality.
We never found that chart ever again, did we? The quadrant chart.
Have we made one?
Yes, we did. We never found it again, though.
The idea is to give like to give breathing room to things like philosophy and being religious. So with religion, you see structure embedded into their spiritual sort of moral framework. With philosophy, you see with religion, you see reality built into the moral framework. With philosophy, you see a moral framework injected into a reality. Does that make sense?
No. You could keyboard shortcut this shit. Oh, it's because it wasn't pencil. Right. Just, drawing one of them quadrant thing. Oh, shit. Yeah. So we had scientism.
Mm-hmm.
And then philosophism. Is it philosophism down there?
Might as well be.
I thought that's how we did it. And then up here was religionism. Yeah.
And then we have spiritualism. Not the type of spiritualism you'll find on Wikipedia. Kind of a borrowed term.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all isms because I wanted it to be. That's like to give it a negative connotation, essentially.
Yeah. And what were the axes of real and moral?
Mm-hmm.
So real is at the top and moral are the bottom. Or wait.
You'll have
or real on the left.
So you have a real on top left, scientism.
Yeah.
You'll have reality and
spiritualism is the complete opposite.
Yeah, so morality and morality, double down.
Right.
So those are the double down extremes. But then, on the other hand, you have some morality injected into your reality.
Mm-hmm.
And on the opposite side, you have some reality injected into your morality. So those are like the non-extreme quadrants. So it would go from here to there, like that. If you were going to go from the real to the moral, you would follow that arc.
Now, why is there a following of an arc? Because I remember we did this before.
There's an ideological arc as well. So the ideological arc is the momentary arc that is...
So, no, the way I'm thinking of it, no matter what, if you're thinking of something moral and you want to execute on it through like an impulse, to construct an impulse, that moral stance is going to have to be filtered through what is the real, because that's how it makes sense with objects in the world as reality.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go through this kind of waterfall process. Either you're going generally from the top left to the bottom right, or from the bottom right to the top left. Those would be the extreme ways.
So there's that, but also let's break it down a little bit. The objects of reality could be, in fact, objects of morality. There's nothing to say that the object that you could perceive to be real is not like a morally defined entity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So that's where you can get really extreme. But oftentimes, you're right, you wouldn't. You would be somewhere between the two.
Yeah. So this is kind of multi-dimensional chart right now.
Yeah.
It can work as situating yourself to say, like, as in the political compass.
Yeah, the dot.
Like, I tend to be over here in this quadrant to this extreme.
And you'll probably place me into scientism, and I would probably thinking close to scientism, but getting into philosophism. Although
for me,
like just off the top of my head kind of stuff. Sure. I'm not sold on it or anything. The reason being is I'm more stuck in making the model entities work together, whereas you're talking about like what does it mean for left and right, what does it mean for politics, how is that? So that's the philosophism part that I was referring to.
Or moral.
Right, but I'm not lacking in any of those aspects. I just don't tend to
So can we actually
focus on
label these axes?
they're already labeled.
Yeah, I know, but
That this is how they're supposed to
so
distribute.
they are distinct from each other in that they're orthogonal or whatever you say,
Right, and it's a bit of a
and yet
trip.
they're given the same name. So what
Yeah,
is the distinction of the difference between going up and down, between going left and right?
your fundamental versus your significant. So if you're significant
Okay, so
framework,
which is along your fundamental and which is your significant axis?
they're mixing and matching. So in this case, the real is both fundamental and significant. In the bottom quadrant, spiritualism, morality is both fundamental and significant. In philosophism, you have reality being more significant, but morality more fundamental. And then you have in religionism your morality being more significant and reality being more fundamental. So the first two quadrants that I tackled are the extremes because they're the simplest to understand. You don't jump out of the real or you don't jump out of the moral, right? In the other cases, we're seeing reality being, for philosophism, we're seeing reality being the major myth and morality fitting into it as a supplementary sort of fundamental underpinning. Oh, it's like this because, God or whatever. And yet, on the flip side, morality is the major component of the myth, right? With reality supplanting it and giving excuses as to why that is the way it should go. So you see that with Christianity and a lot of these kinds of.
Did I fix it?
So here, the fundamentality would be to the real, both in both cases, and here the significance would be to the moral. So that doesn't explain it. Basically, if we were to apply two,
that's just scientism. You're saying what?
So if you were to take each quadrant and split it into two horizontal rectangles.
Yeah.
Just draw a line here, draw a line there.
Yeah, I get it.
So each level, you got your significant, fundamental, right?
So real.
Yeah. So if you were to fill out those boxes in,
but this is true. So you would say real.
Then here you will say the real is fundamental and the real is significant. So significance appears here. If you go down here, the real is fundamental, but the moral is the real is significant, but the moral is fundamental. So the only reason you're giving a shit about reality in your philosophy is because you're trying to inject the moral aspects of life into it. If you notice most philosophies, they're not trying to tell you how things work, they're trying to explain why things feel the way they do to a living individual. So it's like taking the reality as a starting point and then injecting the quote unquote, guess supernatural, whatever you want to call it, into it. So in philosophy, for example, you have like things like first principles, right? Those first principles kind of bullshit. It's trying to establish a sense of, give a reason to it. Why it should be this way. The moral choices of like creation versus not creation. Like it's better to create versus not to create. So therefore, God created. I'm talking rudimentary bullshit at the moment, but I'm just trying to paint a picture with simple words.
Me too.
Like, So we have a lot of
Mine are
these
simpler.
we just have a lot of these kinds of collections of philosophies, if you will, that try to do that. So I'm kind of pegging them down as to like trying to explain reality from the moral perspective. So you're not trying to like impose a morality like you would with religion, but you're trying to justify why certain things would be moral and not moral based on the reality of things. So most
Yeah,
people in the scientific disposition
one or
would
the other.
land there. They wouldn't land in the scientism category.
And
They'd
these
land
are
there.
these are fundamentally like dualistic apprehensions of reality, of existing and interacting, where you're able to calculate by utilizing something as simple as what is real as your highest value or what is moral as your highest value. These are the two ways of navigating using like computer logic,
Hmm.
basically, so everything can just be part of a machine.
And then your morals and your realities take different significant spots in the hierarchy of your choices.
And it's not even that doing this is bad or even
No,
like avoidable. It's just the ability to see that you're doing it and make it a living structure rather than a dead, crusted one.
and then that brings us to what is called the ideological arc. So notice how I presented an ego stack in there, and then you can have a mix and match of moral and real values, right? It's a stack, so you're valuing. So this is more significant than that. This is more significant than this, and so on and so forth, and down the hierarchy you're going, right? At each point, you can have moral or real decisions, right? See what I'm getting at? It's mixed and matched.
Sure.
So I used to describe, imagine a lightning bolt striking across this spectrum randomly, right? A zigzag pattern all over the place between all of the quadrants at once.
Yeah, that was our original.
So that lightning bolt is the moment, if you will. Yeah. And then it might bounce back to some. For example, you could do, yeah, that's a legitimate a way of thinking about this. It could be anything, right? I
Hmm.
go, but it's not going to be random, and we're talking about a repeating system and going through a cycle. So the more a certain shape of a lightning bolt you have, the more you'll gravitate to recreating it, so to speak,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
It's the way neural networks tend to remember things. Repetition, repetition,
Sure.
repetition
Yeah.
solidifies a path.
Through the forest.
So that's what I'm referring to here.
So did I fix the axes now? Because I think scientism and philosophism work now by with the labeling of the axes, but I don't. We need to check the right side.
The problem I have right now is that significance and fundamentality show up in every single quadrant in their own way. So scientism has its own double layer of significance and fundamentality.
Yeah,
So it's not like the
both
bottom,
being uh, real being the focus
yes,
in
reality
both.
being the focus.
Yes, so that works.
Yeah.
Here, philosophism, we can see that fundamentality is that moral, and
No, yes.
significance is that real.
Okay, yes.
Religionism, we can see fundamentality is that real, significance is that moral.
Do we see that though? I don't think the
I don't know.
diagram is showing that.
It does show that, but is that what it is?
You're getting
Okay.
it. You're getting it.
So then spiritualism says the fundamentality is towards moral and significance towards moral.
Right. So you can identify religionism by morality being the main myth, and you can
The most
identify,
significant portion of it.
yeah, and you can identify philosophism by its tendency towards reality. But
In its most significant, like,
yeah, and you can tell that they're not the extremes by having morality play a fundamental role in philosophy, or by having
yeah,
reality play a fundamental
by being
role
a
in,
mix, by having
yes,
their fundamental, it's filling with different
And now
content.
with this mix, all you really need to tell yourself is what is the most upper value, the morality part or the value part. And that gives you a clearer distinction between are you talking to a religionist situation or a philosophical one.
Mm, interesting. Yep. Cool.
The extremes are not covered as much in rhetoric because it's just you take those two positions that are not extreme and you run them all the way to insanity, effectively. Like try to ignore the moral or try to ignore the real. That's how they expose themselves, essentially. If all of the reality objects are just morality objects, you don't have a reality tunnel.
Yeah.
You have a morality tunnel, which is your reality tunnel.
Yeah. Still, the morality objects are objects of a reality.
But reality in this sense talks about momentary reality, like the reality that allows for moments to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the only discussion model speak wise about reality is that moments happen and they're real. And they have a moral quality to them. So there's no need for jumping the boat on this or that. They're both moral and real. Everything is mixed. You just deal with it as is.
Then there's the APS and the layering of the world around us.
Which generally interferes and brings us back to the spectrum. So instead of capitalizing, so to speak, on the moment being what it is, it just drives you to the next moment and the next ideological arc executes and so on. So
Right.
forth. The
I
whole
think
thing
you were
reinforces
going to
itself.
mention something about the structure of hierarchy, um, but it was, I think, more specifically like the ego and how it pokes you and pokes like button pushing, and this is what helps perpetuate it because the systemic automated reactions that we have out in the market are just poking the shit out of each other, like things never ending.
We have transactional protocols to apply to the real and the moral. So we are already given those to begin with by the overarching market myth. So not only is the spectrum becomes available, it's being reutilized as a tool by this market by saying, okay, every time you don't do something moral or something real,
yeah,
there is a reward
exactly.
punishment
It can be
being
incorporated into a machine logic in
right.
which the human just has to judge, is something yes or no? Is this black or this is white?
Mm-hmm.
Then, okay, it's all propositional.
And then we have a whole bunch of self-help books that tell us that nothing is black or white, and they don't make any sense in that context because they don't reflect that machine, which says everything is, which we actually utilize for our reality and morality to begin with. So obviously that kind of stuff goes by the wayside and is entertainment only.
Yeah, and you better not let it slip that you're
feeling cult.
That you're feeling something.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let anybody know.
Incidentally, the theme of my entire day talking was been about masks off kind of stuff, which is funny.
Yeah.
How that's being basically now exploited in saying keep the mask on or else.
Right.
Then we have to wonder why people feel the way they do.
It do be like that. But anyways, I guess we'll take a short break and be right back. We're just blabbing away. Splabbing.
There was a really good point about the membership that you made there. Maybe you should make
Could
it
always
again.
make again, yeah. So, you got a call there? Oh. Yeah, you were complaining about always when talking and discussing things with people, you notice that they're leaving out nuance,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't seem to be finding it interesting or relating to it at all. What I was saying is they're not saying it because they're not in a membership position of whatever model that piece of knowledge is. They're not able to give the nuance because they
Have the
haven't
language.
had insight into it.
The nomenclature isn't there.
Once they get insight, even if they don't have the language, they can at least be grasping for something, and you can still detect that a membership is seeing those nuances and catching on and being like, hey, there's something there.
We were saying the same thing in two different ways. What I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you. What I'm saying is the label not being there, the nomenclature not being there, not as a definitive terminology, but
This comes up in the
it,
essay, by the way.
but then there's an experience that requires nomenclature, right? So now you have a new experience that needs a term, and that the seeking of specific terminology
Mm-hmm.
to put it in place
Yeah,
is what you're talking about there.
and
I feel.
terminology, yeah, sure, the terminology, the
So the
nuance,
membership does not involve knowing the terminology, but
no,
seeking it.
that's towards mastership, because there's a social aspect to terminology.
Right.
You don't just make it up in your mind. Like you can, but you have to link it at some point to the wider world. This is the process of mastery,
Mhm.
to connect with the language. And if in the wider society there's these dead zones of meaning, like missing words, like English, notorious for not having certain words for certain subjective, experiential related stuff, where other languages might. This doesn't guarantee that the population is spiritual or something, just because they
Mhm.
have words for something.
Yeah. So yeah, what I was saying is that if you seek if the to to build up on your point, you recognize membership versus participation in the uh, sense of missing the nomenclature entirely versus having a kind of experience that seeks out a way to define it with nomenclature to begin with.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So the convergence is on the experience. The
Yeah.
words are more like an after effect situation. Then the nomenclature builds, and then it starts to feel all culty like and all that shit.
Hmm. Yeah, that seems right.
And by culty like, I'm not trying to give it a negative inference, but it is where you find charlatanism and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Anything a master would say, the charlatan can turn around and use the same phraseology and all that.
Mhm.
Whatever.
For to reassert the ego,
Yeah. That's
and that's what charlatanism is effectively a term for. Um, and in the process of dismantling, so to speak, what ego is, or just getting to know what it is, you have a whole bunch of interference sound bites that tell you that they do that, but in fact reinforce it instead.
mhm.
That's another way to look at the conspiracy of axiology. It's going to turn value. It's going to run interference in your valuation system to turn it back to the ego. I am good at
Right.
this religion because I've
Well, the
observed
thing
such and
with the
such.
charlatan is you're trusting them by their nature, being charming or whatever. Typically, you're able to they're able to gain trust, and through that, this is where sound bites can be accepted and tested. If you don't have a trust, then
I'd like to move away from like, the idea of charlatanism being like a person being a charlatan to another person, but more like a systemic
yeah,
component
sure,
that is it's broader in that it could be multiple people, it could be different agencies at work without even knowing that they're colluding because the greater system obfuscates everything else. So
Sure.
Charlatanism could be like your
And
self-help books plus the clerk that thinks that, oh, not the clerk, but like whatever um, shamanistic like person or whatever, all each one buying into whatever their own trinkets are and feel good things are, effectively entertaining one another all along, but not doing any of the actual progress.
sure.
Does that make any sense?
Even deeper than that, potentially
Oh
is
yeah,
even in moments
I
of
tried to make it small.
interaction. Even just because maybe you didn't explain something well enough, or you didn't make sure that things were grounded before giving out some information or a connection, you can be
A charlatan.
contributing to charlatanism,
Yeah,
and in
I
that
think
interaction, you could be effectively charlatan.
that describes perfectly the outcome of our
And
previous
I took that's
conversation.
what you meant by systemic,
Yeah,
a more
like
systemic
because I
definition.
wasn't trying to like why I'm attributing it to that situation. I wasn't trying to play the role of a charlatan, right? I just ended up presenting one, despite the fact that I didn't want to, or even with my own awareness of what charlatanism works like, I wasn't able to hold back enough, right? Because the language, the rhetorical devices, and everything else involved are super hijacked to begin with. So anything I already said would have been,
Mm.
and I couldn't play into that.
Yeah, you can get trapped in the whole in scenarios.
It's just the idea of saying it's like, okay, it's not. No, and I was trying to break that reality tunnel in a way of saying, I mean, please give me an example because I understand the hypotheticals. I get it.
Let's not get back into that.
But it matters. It does matters. I'm not trying to like start anything here. I want to hone in on something very specific that's um, happens over and over again. Um, with a lot of hypothetical examples, right? There has to be a point at which, okay, can we please look at specifics, right? And the only aside from mentioning this as a side note, I don't want to get into it. Problem I had with the specific is that it didn't fly, right? Like the situation I was described did not match how I interpret the situation to begin with. So it wasn't working as an example, right? So I kept asking, can we have a real example? But I was only given the same one. And that kind of like really broke everything down because it's like, okay, I've only gotten one bad example that doesn't prove it.
Well,
And then
that's
I can't
accusatory too when
really,
you're digging from somebody to defend themselves, basically, right? That's part.
but
It's
they,
going to be
but,
interpreted as part of the ego
but
battle.
they're presenting the actual issue. Like they're presenting that as an issue. So of course I would expect them to explain themselves as to like why would it be? You, that's like he would have to
So I
convince
think
me
like ego
too,
battle dynamics just have to be understood better, maybe.
perhaps. In fact, that's probably it. But the point
In
remains.
a hostile
The point
stance,
remains
you
is
won't
that
get concessions. You don't have access to his ideology because you're both in an aggressive
and
stance.
what's
You ball up and you protect yourself. You don't start accepting
what's
what ifs
amazing
and
about
but.
what's amazing about that though is that we've mentioned all of this before that started. We've actually discussed that that would be happening. So it's
Of
like
course.
it's kind of like I guess the only validation in this situation is like it unfolded exactly as the model predicts, if you will. It's not a predictory model, but whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn about protocols and all that, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, it's tough for egos
Mhm. Mhm.
um, when you're coming up against that. Every political engagement is like an ego uh, engagement. You're immediately either friend or foe. Usually the signals are already given.
Mm.
Everyone's in their stance.
It's worse than that.
Nobody's learning
All
from each
engagements
other.
become political. So even if the engagement itself isn't starting out political, because of content being politicized to begin with,
Well, maybe
There's
like
no
maybe on
engagement
the
that doesn't
internet,
become.
but in real life,
Hmm.
people just say hi and stuff too.
I was not engaging in politics when I was talking to him. In fact, I've avoided them entirely. I was saying several times, okay, I wasn't talking about that situation. And I had to mention that over and
And
over
yet,
and
it's
over
like
again.
one of the hottest hot button red
So,
fiery issues,
and
and it's not gonna be political. I don't know about that, man.
well, of course, you can accept that there might be a non-political angle here, specifically if you're talking about from the individual's
Well,
perspective.
just that as long as you're willing to accept that it's gonna blow up immediately, as soon as the topic button is pushed.
Except, yes. Like, no. And I don't want to like it. And I never will.
There's so much more important stuff.
Hmm. Not to some people.
8094. Oh, we're only 50 minutes in. It feels like it's been hours. I guess because we chatted for a bit with Dustman.
Mm-hmm.
It was good.
And I want to say on record, I have nothing but respect, but we disagree on a single point.
Yeah,
And the
you should.
reasons we disagree is because their approaches are vastly different.
Um, I what I want to add to that is just that the approach is all that you're missing, because you
That's
could
fair.
have talked and could have told it if immediately it wasn't like a conflict. I don't know always how to get there to mention or say anything, right? Because you get pulled in and sucked in. But there is a way of maintaining boundaries that you will simply not start
Yeah.
transactional relating to somebody by like, well, you give me an example now because you're wrong morally, so now defend yourself. Like it's all subconscious background stuff, right? Like defend yourself. You know, these things like as soon as the hairs start standing up on the back of the neck and everything,
So that's like
like
the
you've
science.
lost.
So the
You might
scientific.
as well just stop even
So
talking.
that's like me bringing science into emotion. The discussion itself is about how people feel, and they will give like all of these stories, if you will, for why that feeling is justified, right? And then the scientific principle in me goes, okay, I'll accept what you're saying. Can you give me a situation like certain because you can build up the hypothetical until you're blue in the face,
Yeah, but
right?
this is the
And
point of like ideology. None of it's even grounded anywhere. So typically, it's not going to be very grounded.
so
Or people won't understand how it's grounded, how parts of it are or aren't grounded, and they don't know how to differentiate, so it's taken as a whole package.
so what I think I was doing, and it's just like I'm thinking about it now. What I think I was doing is I was trying to introduce nuance, right? I didn't want it to be like a general descriptor that's just taken as a fact. I wanted nuance. That thing that bugs me about everything that people don't see, like the thing that's different about me that
The nuance, yeah, that's what we
so
just
I
talked
was
about.
trying to
So
introduce it. I was just trying to introduce it. I
introduce it to
wasn't doing it
yourself.
wrong.
Introduce it to yourself. Whenever you detect that somebody is a participant, pat yourself on the back and feel good about it. Don't get upset or annoyed that they're not accepting the nuance. They are at participant level in that domain, whatever you're discussing, right?
Mm.
That's pat yourself on the back. You recognize it. Great. Now,
I don't know
if
how
they
to
are actually
manage
participating,
participants.
then that means they're having an active interest at least, right? That's what it
Yeah,
qualifies them as.
yeah, yeah.
So like they are trying, right? But it's not they're saying missing, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and this can maybe help you level
No, that's
uh,
good. That's a good point.
your interaction, like your inner feelings, right? And a lot of it's about managing our own feelings. right? Emotional labor.
Well, I clearly did not do that, so.
But this is like to go into war, into the ego battle, and like
Well, like I said, I was a charlatan.
and act as yeah, I guess that's a way, but just act as a fire extinguisher, kind of like a
No, no.
fog.
I get the consequences and all that stuff.
Right.
That's why I'm saying That's why I'm identifying, so to be able to point to exactly that. Um, I was saying earlier how, without even realizing it at the time, I was being one. I
Do you want to go through
recognize it now.
the intro and then see if we want to continue? Because like we could talk about this.
I just think it was a great example. Like, self-reflective, sort of,
Yeah.
what the fuck we're talking about. Why do we talk about charlatanism and never talk about ourselves as one? Well, this literally
Yep.
just
Exactly.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't intentional. It was
And you
simply
should feel good
the.
for recognizing that too, right? Like it's not about guilt, or it
Well, I
shouldn't be.
mean,
Like we gotta manage our inner world better without transactional logic, like punishment and all this.
I think there is a difference between recognizing the quote unquote good karma versus feeling good as a result of a. That's transactional. The Buddhism
Yeah. No, I get it.
the Buddhism way of saying it will be like, don't celebrate the good karma you've received
This is
just now.
reward and punishment.
You've extracted some goodness out of your account. Now you don't have that anymore. You don't need to celebrate that.
Well, here's the thing. Like it could be simply the difference between, okay, I'm not feeling good as a reward for what just happened, but isn't this life good? Like let's go back to
Yeah,
just feeling good by default.
yeah, the default, yes, the default
Right.
of like feeling good because nothing is bad,
Right.
which is actually a default state. Like, again, in Buddhist terms, they point to joy being your actual default state if you remove all of the different
Right.
machinations in
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a journey.
Like it's a repeated sentiment.
So yeah, it was either that or like because we'd like to wrap up the um, like the axiological conspiracy. I mean, if possible. But to me, as I was saying earlier, this essay sort of um, put feels like a cap piece on this series
Mm-hmm.
as to like, okay, let's just contextualize what this all is and what's environment are we even in here,
Mm-hmm.
to how do we move forward? Like what's the organizing principle here?
Interestingly, it's anything because it's immersion.
Yeah,
So there's no prescriptive moving forward sort of
right.
in, induction of action. There is the meditative. Like, if you're going to ask for action in an essay, it's going to come back to focus if you were going to go model.
Yeah, this
Because
is still draft, this essay.
because the immunity guild, right, is the abstraction over the cell. If you think about it, we're building a biological cell with cellular concerns. Okay, what is it pushing out of itself? What is it injecting into itself? What does it do with its free time? And how does it fit into its ecosystem?
Sure.
Those are all things that's
Are
the
we
most
talking
big.
about uh, guild dynamics
Yeah,
type of
yeah. So the guild dynamics is like the thing, the
with
protocols.
the trade guild envelope and
Yeah,
all this for
it's more protocols to make the cell safe.
right.
So its expansion into the environment after immunity, for example, is not to like conquer the environment, so to speak, but to recognize what fitness is in a more detailed
Right.
way. So we're going from like the child myths of don't step on the ice because there's a monster under it to don't step on the ice because it'll can crack and break.
Yeah.
The theme is the same. You don't the actions are the same, but the knowledge is different. So first you reflect just yourself, then you use that reflection to reflect the environment, and then you use that to reflect technology and data and all of that
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. And I was just thinking like how difficult it is to relate like holonic emergence as like it's always denigrated or like looked down upon for like, well, that's not going to do anything. Like that. What do you mean? Just do nothing.
I'm looking at my hand
Just
and
sit there doing nothing. No.
all of the cells that work together, and I'm thinking to myself, how can you ever think that?
Yeah. Right. So it's that mind type reaction. Like, well, of course there has to be the dictator, like dictating everyone in line. Like, how else is the world going to work? Right. So it's that kind of reaction.
Maybe try thinking about a world that doesn't have that and think, how would it work?
So what I kind
Instead of dismissing it.
I feel like I intellectually or academically slap that mindset with this essay, starting right with the intro. So let's just let's go over the intro. I'll give the full intro, so it has more. There's a bit more.
Okay.
So it's called Holonic Relationality: The Organizing Principle of Life. Imagine walking into a thriving rainforest. There is no single commanding entity, yet order emerges through layered relationships. Roots linking soil microbes, pollinators connecting blossoms, and myriad species cooperating and competing to maintain the whole ecosystem's vitality. These nested interdependent systems do not rely on a top-down blueprint. Instead, coherence arises through feedback loops, adaptation, and reciprocal influences. This principle, which we call holonic relationality, is the organizing logic of life. While a tree appears as an independent organism, its existence is inseparable from the soil fungi which it exchanges nutrients, the pollinators that perpetuate its species, and the animals that disperse its seeds. The rainforest therefore operates not through isolated units, but through a dynamic system of relationships that constantly redefine themselves in response to change. This organizing logic is often obscured, however, by the dominance of hierarchies, linear models that fragment our understanding of how systems actually function. Wait, I didn't quite give the. I'm sure you got it, but this organizing logic is often obscured, however, by the dominance of hierarchical linear models that fragment our understanding of how systems actually function. That's a slap. That's oh yeah. Feel that slap. Holonic relationality, by contrast, reveals that linear and hierarchical structures are partial aspects woven into a broader dynamic web of connections. This broader web is not a novel construct, but the default organizing principle of life, underpinning ecosystems, communities, and even cognition. As Stuart Kaufman's work on self-organization illustrates, this kind of seems a bit out of place because
illustrates coherence and complexity.
Yeah, I introduced the authors later, but this is still it's a draft, but so I'm just gonna. Make a note. As Kaufman's work on self-organization illustrates, coherence and complexity emerges naturally without the need for central control. Recognizing this reframes linear models as useful but limited tools nested within the larger holonic structure. So this is really like
I see what you're doing.
Setting up the whole like actually you can't question this. You can't say like my hierarchies.
You drop them into the ontological matrix, and now you're just describing the different little pieces of it. In this, that's like wow, I'm
exactly.
I'll be right back.
Nice. I guess we will take a short little break there. Uh-huh.
He's
Uh-huh.
still alive. Yeah, he is. Inception.
That was an old prompt that I used to use. Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the forest.
Yep. This essay will draw upon the foundational insights of Arthur Koestler, who introduced the concept of holons and holarchies, nested entities that function as both parts and wholes. And hold your breath because this is the longest sentence in eternity. Friedrich Capra, whose systems thinking approach illuminates the web of life, revealing that living systems arise through networks rather than hierarchies. Erich Fromm, who differentiated the modes of being and having, contrasting a more authentic relational way of existing with a more possessive transactional one. Gregory Bateson, who traced the patterns that connect through an ecology of mind, showing how mental and ecological processes are interwoven in feedback loops rather than linear chains. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who understood the primacy of embodied experience, insisting that perception and understanding emerge through our lived bodily engagements with the world. And Eleanor Ostrom,
That would need more qualification, but yeah.
sure, and Eleanor Ostrom, who explored cooperative governance in self-organizing communities, illustrating how local groups can develop rules and norms to manage shared resources without top-down control. Engaging these thinkers will help clarify the theory and practice of holonic relationality and show its enduring importance in both natural and human-made systems.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting way to frame the last sentence. Natural systems do not need building. No, it's just an interesting way to
Right.
to say that, because
But at least to be able to respect a natural system, it helps to understand it.
so I would fix this to more point towards the artificial systems becoming more convergent on the natural systems in
Yeah.
in their functions.
Okay.
Because I don't want to give the impression that we are responsible for how nature works.
No.
It's kind of like the given, if you will.
Of course. The model isn't supposed to be used to like tell nature how to do nature.
Right. Exactly. It's just an odd phrasing that threw me off there.
So I put the comment so when I come back I can just fix
I
it.
saw that. It is important to both systems. However, we're not responsible for building it out.
Maybe
nature.
I can. Maybe.
Just don't want to give that impression.
Maybe it can be mentioned later on, probably. We will examine foundational principles that define holonic relationality, highlighting how conceptual modeling and emergent behavior provide distinct yet complementary lenses.
What?
Yeah, this is supposed to reflect theory and practice.
Emergent behavior.
Theory, practice.
Okay, so the conceptual modeling and the emergent behavior that comes from said modeling.
Yeah, right.
I think that's the tie-in that's missing in that sentence. That the behavior that's emergent.
Yeah. I'll just put that note there. And it's good. I think it's good to work on this as we go. Appreciate comments.
So, right where it says ego, you should have an intervening, comma-separated clause, ego, the artificial hierarchical structure that that is expressed by mouth, something like that. I don't want to leave ego without giving it some qualification.
I'll add the comment to like ideally explain what ego is here, but
Yeah, I don't want to introduce the word ego without.
if possible, right? You have to understand, like,
No, what I'm saying
people,
is
you
that
can't overload people up front.
no, you can't. But if you're going to use ego, and it's already such a overused term to begin with,
That's why this essay has many sections. I put a note.
Okay, then my question then becomes: is there a way to define the ego within?
Hold on.
Within,
I've already answered this in my head. I just have to explain it to you.
Okay.
The way ego is used here, it's fine if people use the commonly understood thing of ego being thought of as a selfish aspect of the self. The word has a negative connotations, ego. If they use it like that, this is fine.
Can you put in brackets then the word selfish or selfishness?
Okay, hold on. We will also explore how the ego can distort these relational flows, reducing them to mere transactions and concealing the fluidity inherent in living systems.
Right. Artificial selfishness.
Everyone already associates ego with selfishness.
No. Objectivism will not associate it with that at all.
But we are going to explore how that ego distorts artificially.
Okay. Look, I'm going to buy in. I'm just saying.
What I'm saying is, all I can do right now is highlight things and come back later and add.
Yeah, no,
so
that's fine.
I've taken your comment now, and all we can do is keep reading.
Fine. Okay.
Right?
If you're going to take my comment, just add the word selfishness into this, so that we can at least refer back to the idea and make sure that we never confuse it with, say, the self.
But what I'm saying is, even if you do confuse it with the self, as Freud originally would, this still works. We're going to explore how the ego can distort these flows. Well, it's close enough. That's like the whole self. That's how Freud would have seen it.
Because ego is a positive in objectivism, for example. That one of their thing is this whole selfishness as a positive.
Okay.
So there's other works that could run interference.
Yeah, selfishness is a good word to add here. Probably. So I
just don't want to lose that, you know?
I agree. By recognizing such distortions, we open a pathway towards restoring relationality as a guiding principle that aligns human actions with the regenerative capacities of the world.
Let me reread that. By recognizing the distortions, we just relationality as a guiding principle. Regenerative capacities of the world.
It's supposed to be optimistic.
The natural world?
It's supposed to be,
because the world, I would just add that in. Because the world would not necessarily have regenerative capacities,
not
but
even
the natural
commented,
world is there.
Accepted. Ultimately, this essay aims to show that holonic relationality offers both a conceptual framework and a practical guide for addressing contemporary challenges. By situating linear and hierarchical models within a broader tapestry of nested relationships, we reaffirm a principle that has always underpinned living systems and invite ourselves to embrace it fully and consciously. It's just happy fluff, right? We can keep going. Holonic relationality begins with Arthur Koestler's notion of holons, entities that are simultaneously wholes and parts within a larger structure, forming what he termed a holarchy. This nested interdependent architecture characterizes life at every scale, from atoms and molecules to cells in tissues, and from organisms and ecosystems to social and political systems. Far from being an abstract or speculative idea, this pattern is visible across natural and human-made systems. For example, a cell functions as an independent unit while also supporting the larger organism to which it belongs. In the same way, local communities contribute to broader societal structures without losing their distinct identity. These relationships reveal how interconnected parts shape and adapt within dynamic systems, forming a whole that is more than the sum of its parts. This dynamic interplay of parts and wholes echoes the principles of complex adaptive systems, a field that demonstrates how emergent complexity and self-organization arise from simple decentralized interactions within diverse systems.
Nice.
This duality underlies the dynamism of holonic relationality and resonates with Friedrich Capra's web of life. Capra and other systems thinkers show that biological and ecological networks organize themselves through feedback loops and distributed agency, not centralized control. Diversity and mutual adaptation enable resilience and adaptability. Such principles.
The word adapt appeared way too many times in the one paragraph.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to comment on that.
Adaptability, too much. Mutual adaptation enables resilience.
Right, it's like repeated right in the same sentence.
Yeah.
That's what threw me off.
That's shitty, so just...
And evolution.
Mark that.
No. Just end the sentence with evolution instead of adaptability, and we're good.
Resilience and what?
Evolution.
Yeah. Mutual adaptation. Okay. Evolution. Yeah, that's a good thing, I guess. Such principles reflect a holonic structure wherein each component can be understood as both part of a greater whole and as a center of agency within its own sphere. From biology to organizational theory, we find that complexity arises naturally from local interactions. Neuronal pathways in the brain self-organize, rainforest species, each pursuing survival, collectively generate ecological balance. These patterns demonstrate holonic relationality as a flexible framework for describing and engaging life's complexity. Rather than preserving a rigid blueprint, it reveals. Rather than presenting a rigid blueprint, it reveals a continuous dance of parts and wholes, inviting us to appreciate how adaptation and cooperation emerge when no single agent dictates the entire system. Building feels like it's building up.
All right, the ego's role. That should probably set my mind at peace.
Yeah, the ego's role in distorting relationality. If holonic relationality is so fundamental, why does it often remain hidden or warped? Erich Fromm's distinction between the being and having modes of existence helps answer this. In the being mode, relational flows are authentic, fluid, and responsive, allowing individuals to engage with others and the environment as ends in themselves rather than means. In the having mode, ego imposes rigid boundaries, treating relationships as commodities or transactions to be controlled and possessed rather than nurtured. For instance, in the being mode, you might relate to a friend as a complex, changing person with whom you share experience, while in the having mode, you might see them more as a source of something you want, a status, resource, or validation, fragmenting genuine relationality. Fromm's market orientation, where value is measured in terms of exchange, shows how the ego-driven mindset can distort holonic patterns. So is that sinking? Sinking okay?
Fine.
Good enough?
It's fine. It's
For now, to move on, Gregory Bateson's Ecology of Mind highlights the damage done when natural feedback loops, information exchanges that keep systems balanced, are disrupted by power hierarchies that prioritize domination over mutual benefit. Bateson's Patterns That Connect underscores how order arises from dynamic, interwoven interactions, rather than from any singular authority. For example, consider the way a healthy coral reef regulates itself. Fish, coral, algae, and microorganisms continuously influence each other's population and behaviors. No single species controls the whole. The stability and diversity emerge from their relational patterns. This illustrates what Bateson meant by the patterns that connect, the underlying web of relationships that maintain coherence and resilience. It's always there. It's always there.
Yeah, not an argument you need to make.
That's just, it feels like another
No, you need
slap,
to make it
another slap moment because it's like, it's there. It's just there. Not something you have to argue for or defend. Realigning with holonic relationality does not mean eradicating the ego, but understanding its tendencies and shifting away from the having mode. By cultivating awareness, we can recognize patterns of control and commodification.
Okay, so here I now have another nitpick.
And choose instead to nurture connection and empathy.
Cultivating awareness is a meaningless
Okay.
phrase. Because it's been, like, you know what I mean by that. It's been used for everything.
Yeah.
Awareness of.
It's called a cliche. It's a bad cliche.
So instead of cultivating awareness, maybe something to point towards education, the most fundamental guild of all. To basically say, instead of cultivating awareness, the most fundamental knowledge that one human can have is about that. Or is encouraged to have, or, more like, not cultivating awareness, but inducing this kind of way of thinking, to present this kind of model, to inject dharma, if you will.
Okay. The most fundamental knowledge or education a human can have is about this.
It's like the education guild, right?
So this is our...
We always focus on immunity guild. Focus. But the thing is that the education guild is right underneath that, and is telling you what focus is. Right? So it's like that education part is even more fundamental than the immunity part. All of which I think you already know, but I'm just elaborating.
So you do like, we can choose instead to nurture connection and empathy? Is that fine?
I didn't read that far.
Okay, so we'll read again.
By
education, let's say, we can recognize patterns of control and commodification and choose instead to nurture connection and empathy. This is what I told Dustin today.
Nurture and empathy is like halfway, and done wrong is horrible because it can be hijacked to shit.
Yeah. So not specific enough. That's I figured.
To finish that idea, the idea is good. The thing
not technical enough.
That I'm feeling that's missing is that we need to know what we mean by empathy, and we need to know what we mean by sympathy.
Yeah.
And what the fuck are we actually nurturing? Because left at this, it's just as wishy-washy as any self-help book, right? Like, empathy does not mean, it does mean stepping into somebody's shoes, but it means like adopting the narrative and living through it moment by moment. Our version of empathy is a little bit more nuanced, if you will. So what we mean by empathy, what we would mean by sympathy, and when is it appropriate to apply one, the other, or both? Because not every situation calls for empathy. Not every situation calls for sympathy.
So let's work on that later. So we can choose instead to nurture connection and empathy. This reorientation extends beyond individual psychology to cultural norms, emphasizing collaboration over competition, long-term ecological health over short-term profit, or cooperative governance over rigid top-down management, are collective ways of restoring holonic flows. In doing so, we realign ourselves with life's inherent relational patterns. That was very prescriptive, I know.
There's contradictions in there.
Political and prescriptive.
Yeah, because it's all top-down. There's no room for actual non-authoritative. So when you stop, it's the governance.
Are you talking about because we're already?
No, it's because it's saying about governance.
We're already in the certain plateaus, so therefore we have to adapt to them.
Yeah. However, governance as is as the word is, implies the opposite, the authoritarian structure, right? You can't have your like traditional form of governance. Um, I'll try to like make it more down to earth. There is some kind of governance, but that governance is self-perpetuated through the shared understanding of the common myth. So if everybody's in the same myth, top down, and
Yes.
that myth is the sort of like a quote unquote authoritative structure, then you don't need governance of the people specifically. It's already part of the package of the people. They govern themselves. There's a small.
We do get to that,
That's
but
a nuance.
this has to be like, I agree that this sounded bad. Didn't sound right quite.
Especially when we're talking about solutions.
Yeah,
Because the final goal does not
it's delicate.
the final goal does not recognize a distinction between a governing body in the abstract and the physical people which it governs as a top-down authoritative
I think
clamp
I think you're
down.
going to enjoy this essay.
Oh, I'm not arguing with it. I'm not arguing with it. I think I'm picky because the wording is still sliding backwards.
Yeah.
It's the sliding back that bugs me.
Yep. The AI does it all the time.
I know. So
Sliding back
I'm just nitpicking.
into dualism, basically. You could
Yeah, I
summarize
know
it.
you understand what I mean. Warning.
Yeah. So
3, 2.
good call. Yeah. So recognizing holonic relationality in practice.
Mm-hmm.
Holonic relationality is not a remote theory. It can be seen in countless contexts. Ecologically, every organism influences and is influenced by a myriad others. This inherent interconnectedness reveals a broader truth. Systems organize themselves through nested relationships, with no central planner required. From ecosystems to neural networks, coherence emerges naturally as life continuously shapes and reshapes itself. Bateson's patterns that connect underscores how order arises from dynamic interactions rather than from any singular authority. Such coherence is emergent and adaptive, visible in thriving coral reefs, old-growth forests, or local communities that self-organize in times of crisis. I like that they added that. The AI, I didn't ask for this, but it is a good example.
Because the framework of the system breaks down
Exactly.
at that
The
spot.
model is still there. Like the holonic relationality still exists in a neighborhood that's abandoned by the world,
system.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like it's a glaring example, actually.
Yeah. So this is a fist pump moment. In human cognition and behavior, we also find holonic patterns. Thoughts, emotions, and habits form nested feedback loops, shaping how we perceive and respond to the world. You may enjoy this part. Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology deepens this insight. Our perception is embedded and relational, meaning we do not first register the world as a set of isolated objects and then piece them together. Rather, we experience an immediate holistic sense of belonging in any environment. For Merleau-Ponty, the body is not a detached observer, but an active participant in perception, shaping the way we experience space, other people, and nature. For instance, stepping into a forest isn't simply about seeing individual trees. It is about feeling yourself immersed in a textured living environment that you perceive through sight, sound, smell, movement, and presence all at once. This lived participatory perception mirrors how ecosystems cohere organically. It exemplifies holonic relationality as something we experience directly, not merely theorize about.
Okay. What that paragraph is missing is how. It says that, yes.
Right.
but it doesn't go into it enough to convince you as to why that's the case. Like, why is it saying this live participatory participatory? Hold on.
It's actually missing one sentence that I remember from an earlier version where it was like, when you walk into a room, you see the whole room as one existing contiguous thing.
And then you divide it up. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of like this holistic holonic perception.
Yeah. So this paragraph is missing a lot of how. In other words, it's telling you the end result, but it's not showing you the work. Right? So this is a kind of
We need to develop.
I don't like this paragraph not because it's not true, but because it's wishy-washy with what's true.
Yeah.
And by doing that, it's sending it back into charlatan land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some things got taken out too that I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it because you were gonna be like, I knew you'd be like, damn, but it missed out on it. Took it out at some point. I had to like condense it. This was so long. I had to like.
Yeah, no.
Really.
It's good that I'm only picking up on specifics. Not I'm not judging the whole thing as.
Yeah.
So the paragraph would be fine if it didn't just make a random claim and then didn't like go into an explanatory mode as to being like, that's what we mean by X.
Yeah.
And in this case, what I'm actually bugged by, it's the last couple of sentences. This lived participatory experience mirrors the ecosystem. How does it mirror it? It doesn't say. Like there's no logical jump from what we just said to what it's
like,
saying.
Is it
there.
just arbitrarily mirroring it? Like just by happen chance?
What the fuck are you talking about? Yeah. Okay. So I'm.
Another thing I realized, I'm not sure if I mentioned the strange loop in this entire essay, but it has to be. I just forget if I did. I kind of don't think I did. But just for exactly that, like, what do you mean mirroring? Of course, our perception through the strange loop where everything at the top has to take care of the lowest from the top to the bottom.
Right.
Somehow. In its structure has to somehow reflect those.
Right.
That's
so
where you
have a hand. Oh, look at that. You have a word for hand. And the individual fingers that are on it.
Yeah.
And
what a coincidence.
Yeah, like, that's what I'm saying.
Fingernails.
So that's the mirroring. So when we're saying mirroring, we need to explain what's mirrored, I guess, and how.
Yes. On a social level, Eleanor Ostrom's research on common pool resources like fisheries, irrigation systems, or communal grazing lands show that communities can sustain shared wealth without centralized enforcement by developing their own rules, sanctions, and trust-building measures.
Protocols, yeah.
Mm-hmm. In these local contexts, people collectively negotiate responsibilities and benefits, adapting over time in response to challenges. Instead of relying on top-down mandates, the community's holonic organization emerges from the bottom up, balancing local autonomy with the stability of the larger whole. Recognizing holonic relationality involves tuning into these relational patterns and participating more consciously in them, whether in personal relationships, ecological stewardship, or community building practices.
So just commentary on my part.
Yeah.
This points right back to the Education Guild, in the sense that everybody who's participating in the community has to have a sense of shared values. Where do you get that sense of shared values? Through education about the community. So each individual member of said community educates themselves about each individual member of the community, and through that education, they build up the immunity of their system.
So it's interesting that
what goes in and what comes out, and when it's left alone, and when it's okay to do whatever it is okay to do, comes naturally and emergent from that education.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge connection.
It's the default job.
And it's a huge connection material here because I'm describing guild dynamics in its purest form, yet you're talking about a concrete example in which this sort of thing is shown, if you will. So how it's shown, well, we're talking about immunity and education and how education precedes it. And what you're talking about here is how everybody, each individual member of said community will educate themselves on the protocols of said community to begin with, thereby
That's implied. This is all
thereby keeping
implied.
that shared resource immune to like natural
Right.
disaster, if you
Yeah,
will.
yeah. So for these community type systems to exist, you can apply the model to understand how the sound bites functionally organize
To
the
create the protocols.
through the matrix, right? There's an ontological matrix that's built up, starting up through education, in that every member must be educated somehow. Like you teach each other.
And if you recall, ontological matrices do not only pertain to market systems, they're also part of the polymorphic machine as well.
Right.
In which holons are the substitute entity for agency.
Yep. So overcoming barriers to perceiving holonic relationality. This is an interesting one. Why is holonic relationality difficult to recognize, even though it underpins life itself? One major challenge lies in the frameworks society imposes upon our perception. Cultural, linguistic, and educational conditioning often pushes us into a having mode of existence where relationships are seen as transactions and the world is fragmented into isolated parts. Obfuscated.
And commodified.
Yeah.
You can actually add that in. Comma. Obfuscated and commodified. Not even in brackets. I think it's part of that sentence.
Relationships. Yeah, sure, we can throw it. It's one of our terms. Obfuscated and commodified. Yep. This contrasts sharply with the being mode, where we intuitively sense the interconnectedness of life and participate in relational flows. As infants and children, we naturally inhabit this being mode, experiencing the world as an integrated whole without rigid boundaries. Yet society's emphasis on accumulation, categorization, and commodification gradually dulls this awareness. Jacques Lacan, a major figure in psychoanalysis, offers critical insights into how language shapes our perception of reality. Building on Freud's foundational work, Lacan argued that language mediates our relationship to the world, structuring not only how we think but how we experience ourselves and others. His concept of the symbolic order, the realm of language, culture, and shared meanings, reveals how the terms available to us shape the very boundaries of what we can perceive and understand.
Should be can and can't.
Yeah, a boundary. On the other side of the boundary is what you can't.
Of what we can or cannot. That sentence would be better served with.
I'll consider it.
I just want that sentence to give the notion of.
Yeah, I'll put it in yellow.
The rigid boundary of you're allowed to perceive this, but because you're allowed to perceive this, you're not allowed to perceive that.
Sort of, yeah. Yeah, that's the effect of it. But anyways, when the vocabulary for interdependence is lacking, so too is our ability to recognize. Maybe that's not the best.
No. This actually solidifies the previous point I made.
You like this word?
Yeah.
When the vocabulary for interdependence is lacking, so too is our ability to recognize and discuss it.
For this kind of interdependence.
Right.
This kind of interdependence. Not general interdependence. We're not talking about wishy-washy shit.
Wait. As long as in the being mode we've emphasized interdependence somewhere, I'm trying to...
Interconnectedness?
Alright, well, for now, I'll just add a note.
I'm fine if you don't take my suggestions as gospel truth. Like, I'm not.
Just in line, if I can, like, flow it, like... Because I don't want to make a change and then just lose it and just forget it. Like
the sentence sounds more appropriate this way.
Okay, so when the vocabulary for this kind of interdependence is lacking, so too is this kind being mode. Basically,
so is
being mode.
Not so too. So is. It's not so too is. It's so is.
So too, no, because the vocabulary is lacking, and also our ability becomes lacking. So too is our ability to recognize and discuss it. Holonic relationality.
That doesn't flow right.
Yeah, it's one thing is lacking, and then so too is another thing lacking.
You don't need the two. If this is happening, so is this. You don't need the two.
Yeah, so
the two is marbles in your mouth wordiness. It's just a filler.
It is, but it does. There is a distinction. It does change the flavor of it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make it not sound like an AI wrote it.
Okay, that sounds good. Holonic relationality, like the being mode, risks invisibility when it remains unnamed or undervalued in our cultural narratives. By understanding how language frames our reality, Lacan's psychoanalytical lens helps us uncover the relational patterns that remain hidden beneath the structures of commodification and categorization. Perceiving holonic relationality often requires transformative shifts, moments of clarity that disrupt habitual patterns of thought. These shifts may occur through contemplative practices, immersive engagement in nature, or what Maslow called peak experiences, where intense joy or connection transcends ordinary consciousness. Similarly, Carl Jung's concept...
I'd like to add something before you continue.
Yeah.
There's another situation in which this shit comes up. It's often talked about soldiers coming back from war and being unable to recognize the day-to-day life of other people as significant anymore. Like the arbitrariness of it hits them really hard because like they know for a fact that that's not what matters.
Well, this doesn't necessarily mean membership, but it could just mean severe depression and PTSD.
Yeah, but there is a body of work. I forget its origin, but it was exploring how these kinds of moments of realization, if you will, appear to people who have had these kinds of traumatizing experiences. So they're like kind of forced into it, like PTSD, as you said. But
yeah,
but like that sense of recognition of the arbitrariness of the system appears in a very clear sort of
I'll just put a note like often trauma-induced.
Because you have a list of a whole bunch of positive experiences, like things that don't require self-reevaluation, but the traumatizing experiences also force that in a more
yeah. They
you
can. Remember we talked about the dark side and the light side. So a PTSD-induced experience, peak experience, or whatever, could be like ultimately leave a person in a state of deep insight, but also crippling like
their capacity
depression
for being social.
Like it just everyone is totally not like me. There's no one will ever understand this.
Yeah.
Right. That's the dark side, basically.
The side that has no cushion to fall back onto, which we used to also refer to as a model or dharma.
And it's tragic insight. They actually gain an insight that is akin to like becoming an adult in a tribal society. So
it's like it's like gaining a model, that kind of model insight of the depravity of the system without actually having the model to show where that could be mitigated in the first where that could be mitigated in the first place. So
Right.
so you're given all the problem,
Pardon.
no solution. Whereas with the positive sort of training experience, you're given the solution before you're given the model, the problem to begin with, to solve to begin with. So the fall doesn't involve a lack of something else to catch you.
Yeah.
And we call that the dark night of the soul because the lack is still there, so it's the soul.
Hmm. And this
But
is one
it's
way that charlatanism can easily present itself. When somebody is, yes, giving master level, like extremely insight, could even be grandmaster level connection with somebody to help them perceive from membership, participant to membership.
mhm,
If they haven't been prepared for that, that's a
right.
charlatan. Doesn't matter how like technical or great or glorious
So,
your
so, so,
connection
so what you're
was.
saying is that their capacity for dismantling the ego in itself, or the market machine, or whatever the fuck you're going to call the dismantling process. Uh, and again, I'm using this metaphorically. We're not dismantling anything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything remains a part, just recontextualized. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're saying is that a litmus test for charlatanism as it is, as we've been describing it, is essentially they if they can break it down the ego and provide the support cushion to fall into, so the dark night of the soul situation is simply doesn't or is negligible or doesn't occur versus nothing.
That's impossible to calculate to account for.
Of course, because this is not qualitative, uh, quantitative. This is qualitative.
But what were you saying? I thought you were saying like providing like forcing a cushion to exist somehow. Like
So what I'm basically saying is that you can identify charlatanism by the, I guess you could call it pre-work. So if we're talking about a master guiding somebody from participants to membership, right? So this is somebody who's trusted, or a system that's trusted,
yeah, remember
and
I
so on and
sent you
so
that
forth.
the handbook for membership. That's the kind of thing that
Yes.
should be available to just for anybody to be like, okay, they need to be walked through these steps.
Yeah, I think
You
I do,
you
but not
can't
not
shouldn't
not
just
clearly.
skip ahead.
So my point though is that you can use the same rhetoric to like dismantle a person's sense of identity with the world as it is through all of these great sounding sound bites, right? But if at the end of the day, then when that person actually breaks through or recognizes anything,
Yeah,
what correct or not correct, are they falling down through the cracks or are they being supported by the said whoever broke through that person? And by support, I don't mean like your yeah, yeah,
you're
I'll,
pointing at a relationship
I'll give you boarding room in my compound. I'm not
like a
talking about that
like
support.
guru type relationship. So this is
Yes,
a
but
valid
more nuanced.
in Vajrayana, is it more? Where the guru student relationship would be
Intimate, essentially.
like
Not sexual, but
must fully
intimate.
exist, must fully be there, so that it's like you're in a cocoon and you're like transmuting,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's a good metaphor. Yes, you don't. The cocoons don't last forever. You're not isolated
Yeah,
for forever.
right.
Um, Problem is that in practice, it's been abused. So
Of course.
yes, but not the abusive part. We're talking about the things that's sensitive to the
It
abuse.
just to the modern conditioned mind, it would seem absurd that I wouldn't get abused. That in like intimate, tight relationships
Oh, it does get
wouldn't
abused.
just be about sex, right? In this society, you
You know,
couldn't imagine.
in this case, the conversation is simply not about sex. It's the mental intimacy, if you will. It's kind of like allowing another person to pick your mind effectively. So for that, you literally
Yeah.
need that
Well,
the same level of
as the
trust.
guru from what I recall, you're embodying an archetype and just being that like walking god in this cocoon stage.
In the ideal sense, you read the person who your guru to and become the deity
Right. There's
that they need.
one of I think we reiterated.
We have a method like that. Yes. It's based on the arc of ideology. So you read the arc of ideology
Mm-hmm.
and tailor yourself to be whatever figure that is appropriate for walking through it and dismantling it.
Yeah.
By dismantling it, I don't mean get rid of it. I mean
Eliminating the whole situation to the student so they can see everything clearly.
exposing it.
Yeah.
So some people need a more wrathful deity to handle that arc, and some people need a more gentle, loving sort of deity, and you have like this mythological sort
Yeah.
of
It's like
universe
it's
in
an
which
intuition
in
of
which they are
from the guru, I guess, like where's the cracks? Like where in this foundation of this person, where are the cracks?
Mhm.
And then you just split it open.
And so the guru's job is effectively to become the perfect deity, and this is where you like have to really understand the word mastery here. Like
You
it's
you
not a,
become
it's
like the answer to all their life questions, whatever they feel is the most important life question.
Yeah.
Suddenly it's on stage performed like a drama right in front of them.
Right, and the deity is that person, but also all the aspects of that person that should go a certain way and whatever. There's
So
there,
should we get through this?
it's very unique.
Are we on a tight time? Um,
Let's go.
So holonic principles are not theoretical add-ons to life. They govern the dynamic interplay of our bodies, minds, communities, and ecosystems. The challenge lies in bridging the gap between intellectual understanding and embodied perception, moving from conceptual abstractions to direct lived experience. This requires cultivating practices that quiet the noise of ego-driven thought.
No.
I know, I was having questions here too, it's fine.
Sorry, I actually have a suggestion to make it better.
Okay.
Not moving from conceptual abstractions to direct lived experiencing, but but making conceptual abstractions parallel lived experiences. So the abstraction should
because this is
line up with
this is a dualistic
the
statement,
experience.
correct?
Yes.
So undualize this, basically.
Can you add another note? Abstractions should mirror the lived experience.
Right. Ideally, and move towards
Isomorphism.
this through feedback to ISO.
It's not ideally. You do move through this tool. That's how you get there. Feedback. So it's not an ideal.
But that it should mirror perfectly. Depends how you look at it.
Instead of ideally, say practically.
Let's just remove that. Moving towards this through feedback. Okay, whatever, we'll get it. This requires cultivating practices that quiet the noise of ego-driven thought and allow us to see and participate in the patterns of
ego-driven,
connection that
transactional thought.
I love that word.
You know I'm improving it, right?
Dude, yeah. I think we just have a few more sections, and they just keep getting better and better, and then we're both gonna cringe our faces off.
Look, I'm loving this, so
at the conclusion.
Don't worry about me.
You're feeling it like how validating it is, right?
Yeah.
Like they shouldn't. It's not rocket appliances.
It's always too far removed for me for the way I actually think about it, but it's fine.
Yeah, but this is in a way that people can follow along and
no, I know,
absorb.
But my model speak and my thinking process are basically one and the same thing.
Well, that's we translate. Practicing alignment with holonic relationality. To align with holonic relationality is to shift from control to participation, cultivating systems within ourselves and our immediate surroundings that self-organize and adapt.
Okay. The first sentence, yes, but problematic.
Yep.
It's got no concept of what participation looks like without control. So, like, you don't shift from control to participation because participation will probably be controlled in the first place.
These are
It's kind of contradictory.
we're mixing. We're having like a category error.
Yeah.
So
I'm
that's
not
fine.
just highlight it and say this needs fixing.
This requires adopting a mindset of generative responsiveness, one where we listen to the needs of our environment and act in a way that fosters coherence without imposing rigid control.
Not adopting.
What's adopting? Where did what?
This requires adapting.
Oh, this requires
Intuiting.
adopting a mindset.
No,
sure, yeah.
It's not adopting it. It's intuiting it. So education isn't going to like intellectually convince you.
I have to completely change this. I'll just put
This has to come from within, right?
not adopting. Is a dumb language. AI needs a spanking. I've been thinking about it. Lets you put in like persistent commands to it, like to the AI. There's a section under your profile where you can like say always listen to these directives, and I've been thinking about that to make sure like it stops making stupid ass mistakes like this. Like it's got to be a list of like look it over. Did you make this mistake? Did you make this mistake? I think that's how I would talk to it basically.
I think I'm going to adopt that too.
Yep. Adopt it. Okay, wherever it is. Requires whatever intuiting a generative responsiveness, one where we listen to the needs of our environment and act in a way that fosters coherence without imposing rigid control. Holonic alignment begins with the recognition that personal action, no matter how small, ripple outward to shape the systems we inhabit. I guess that's kind of like a bottom-up.
Accountability.
This is upload. I guess, or it's download actually. This implies both download and upload, but it's not specific. You dig? In practice, this means moving beyond reactive tendencies and developing reflective habits that nurture connection and resilience. Practices such as mindfulness, gratitude, and small acts of care foster the relational flows that underpin holonic systems. For example, taking time to support a neighbor in need or initiating open dialogue with a family are not just isolated actions, they contribute to larger networks of trust and mutual support. These seemingly modest adjustments strengthen relational ties and generate the conditions for adaptive, resilient systems at every scale.
Preach!
Hey, by shifting focus from domination to participation, we open ourselves to this is probably a better category alignment from the top. Does that work? To shift from domination to participation, isn't that kind of? Yeah, it's still.
But you don't have to repeat it there.
Well, this is gonna.
I don't feel like
this is gonna change anyways. We open ourselves to the feedback loops that guide the interconnected web of life. This alignment does not demand grand gestures, but thrives in the cumulative effects of countless small adjustments. When we approach life as co-creators in a relational web, we naturally foster systems that adapt, regenerate, and sustain themselves. Living holonic relationality, that sounds whack, begins with personal responsibility and awareness, showing that even the smallest contributions can ripple outward to create clarity and coherence.
What's interesting there is that how much those two paragraphs that we just read resonate with my personal lived experience in the last few months, if you will.
Yeah.
Like my personal experiences with my self-improvement, for example.
So this resonated with,
yeah.
with you? That's good. This is practicing alignment with holonic relationality.
It's literally saying the same things that I've been doing.
That's a good sign.
Like that's a way that's like a more generic description of it. But what I've been telling you is exactly is the actual
Mm-hmm.
things
Yep.
that occurred in my life.
This should be. It's supposed to be scale invariant and generically applicable, right? That's the point of
Yeah.
a fundamental
So
model.
my commentary is basically that I validate these two paragraphs effectively with my own lived experience, and it's very recent and it's very fresh.
Yeah, that's
Like
wild, eh?
literally that.
Dude, Matt, I'm telling you, like, since like reading that nonviolent communication about the ego, and now um, Freud and Lacanian psychoanalysis, there's no question in validity of shifting in that the model shifted in a fundamental way, like qualitatively. In my own model, had some like decent adjustments, and that's how I was able to stop.
Were they towards what I was saying?
I don't know. I was able to stop war in SOTS. That's a fucking feat and a half.
Does it still line up with the model? I'm not asking for self-validation. I'm asking if the model is working.
Um, so yeah, working in the sense that a model is there to validate experience, basically. Does it describe what happened? Yes or no? You can also use it to try and create an experience. But to me, looking back at many parts of the model, don't you think that, doesn't it seem like I'm able to piece things together in a more coherent way somehow right now? Like with this essay, as far as just the whole context, contextually placing the things that we've been talking about, placing them into a more meaningful
For sure.
context.
Yeah.
That's the shift. There's a shift, man. One of those. I know it's you can feel excited, elated sometimes, and all
No, I
that.
know it's the same problem with nuance. I see it, but not in the same way that
Let's hit a quick
people do.
break here. Potentially, yep. Even like able like contextualizing the Dustin encounter today, right? I wouldn't have been able to have those insights. Like everything you said was valid and probably could have worked, but if you'd established that participation first instead of a hostility, you can't play into hostility. As soon as people get worked up, you can't unwork it. So it's like things go away. You have to wait till tomorrow, basically. It's like already a fight.
Yeah.
So like training. Oh, did it ever get dark, eh?
Mm-hmm. You can't even see you. You can barely see me. I look like I'm not from around here.
Look like straight pimp. Alright, which one are we? Let's see. Oh, there it is. I think I can adjust this.
Huh, nice.
Better.
Well, I mean, more honest, if you will.
Better.
It's just more like what we look like.
Well, it's yeah, daylight just gone. It's like
It's just weird to see me like in a red tinge. Not that I care, but like
suppose.
it's just not usual.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Insights.
so many.
Insights are great, and that's what I hope for.
What's interesting is that those insights are like mixed, like personal experiences and intellectual ones. They're like both getting really mixed into the fold right now. What we're talking about,
That's the most
like,
powerful stuff.
what we're talking about now, like, is totally reflective in my own personal sort of story for the past couple of months.
Yeah,
Or,
that's in this very essay that I wrote.
yeah, like I was reading the essay and I was like, I just literally did that and it fucking worked.
Right.
And I'm not saying this as like, hey, I want to sell this. I'm saying this from the perspective of like, I'm fucking excited because for the first, like, not the first time in my life, but it feels like for the first time in my life.
Like a relief from
Like I've let go of all of the tendencies to like push for shit,
from your
and all that did like like it gave me everything, like all of the things I was pushing for, right? I
yeah.
had a very similar experience for
Interesting. That's kind of like the hierarchical transactional having mode
yeah
of being, right?
yeah and then once you do the being thing, the having thing just like simply fucking
Still happens.
yeah
Like still, it's being satisfied.
right.
Yeah, that's a
The
wild.
other
That's a leap of
experience,
faith
the
for
other
people.
experience I can really point to is like how I met my wife in the first place is when I stopped looking for getting together with people,
Yeah.
right? Like it was when
So
I
that's got to resonate.
I remember like feeling like I'm just giving up. Fuck this. Like fuck it. Like it's just not working, right? And pretty much as soon as I've done that.
Yeah. Stop being so like seeming desperate to everyone.
And that's the thing. That's what you look like.
Right.
You just look desperate for
You're
shit,
just
and that's just not.
signaling your inferiority.
Yeah, and how attractive is that, right?
That's
So
funny.
it resonates on like many life events. It resonates on current life events, and it isn't a mystery to really be look to be honest about what it's saying. It's not like this profound quote unquote truth that we're discussing. We're just talking about like not trying to control the situation, which is like a shit you hear in self-help books all the fucking time.
Hmm.
Not that we're trying to do self-help
Yeah. No.
here.
That this is the AI always, especially in conclusions and near ends of paragraphs, is giving like the prescriptions
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
every single time.
I erased that shit.
Yeah, half the time you just delete both the introduction and the conclusion, and the meat is still fine.
Mm.
Or it could sometimes things like that. Just 'cause
Oh boy.
often the intro will be too contextual to your conversation, and then it'll get into generics.
So I just read the first two words of the next paragraph, and I am like tweaking
Uh-oh.
a little bit.
Sentences or words?
The first two words.
Governance structure. Yeah, are you triggered? You triggered? Well, it's the next section. Holonic relationality and governance.
Okay, 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 okay.
Are you ready for this? Governance
Let's try.
structures that resonate with holonic relationality reflect the same principles of nested relationships and generative responsiveness that operate on a personal level but scaled to collective action. These structures emerge when communities self-organize to manage shared resources, addressing challenges locally while remaining connected to broader frameworks. Eleanor Ostrom's research on common pool resources demonstrates how decentralized, nested decision-making groups empower localized problem-solving without losing coherence at larger scales. For example, small farming cooperatives often thrive by balancing the needs of the individual members with the demands of the regional market, creating systems that are both flexible and robust.
Okay, so here's where I got triggered. There are no governance structures. So it starts off with saying governance structures that are doing this, and then the entire paragraph does not discuss any kind of governance structure.
Yeah.
That's the problem with it.
No,
It's not wrong,
these structures.
but they're not governance structures. They're still just collective emergent protocols, but they're not governance structures in that there's nothing locking them in into being this is the structure we're in. There's nothing to say this is the structure. Each individual will
So we just have to qualify
manipulate said structure, right?
Manipulate what?
Manipulate said structure.
Ah, the structure. Yes. Okay.
So no matter so even if there's an overarching structure, it doesn't govern it. It simply is a modifiable medium that is responsive.
Yeah.
To
I get it.
To the it is the environment.
So we have to make sure that that the correct model interpretation of what a governance structure is, because people are always going to believe that governance structures exist.
We do have a model for this. So environment, organism, a neural OS, social OS. You remember that?
Yeah.
The social OS.
The natural hierarchy.
The social OS actually becomes the environment of the whole, so it takes into account the environment without the organism, the neural OS, and the social environment all together.
Yeah.
And it creates the environment out of that. So the final product is a strange looped sort of monstrosity. And this is what we're looking at.
Yeah, correct. So in other words, it's something you would calculate contextually in an interaction. Same as it ever was.
And that entire formula, all it does is points out what the holons are.
Now, hold on. Here's what you're going to have is these protocols. Let's say version 1 of this, of a set of 5 protocols allow this stewardship to happen. An agreement, handshaking of everyone that version 1 of these 5 protocols is what we're going to do. That's a virtual governance structure that emerges from that, even though, yes, everyone has their own thing going on.
Yes. Yes. There's never a point in which there's not an overarching myth pushing down.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So we're expecting that.
That's what I mean. We have to accommodate for that.
So, but the difference between governance is that usually when you talk about governance, it will set up a department within itself to regulate itself apart from the thing it's governing. It's isolating itself.
Governance
into its own little abstraction.
Governance itself has to be embodied.
That abstraction that cannot exist in the holonic sense because of the ever-shifting nature.
You're talking about basically bureaucracy,
right?
Existing.
Right.
No, the way governance has to work is an individual sees version 1 of this protocol, 1 of 5.
So
say the
maybe we
first
need-
protocol is flawed, so let's do version 2
So
of
maybe we need two
protocol
terms.
1. So we give a protocol version 2 of this one, 1 of 5. Now you have one version 2, the other is still version 4. Or version 1. The other 4 are version 1.
I think we
Right?
need a,
Everyone agreeing to use that, this is how you would share a protocol and update.
So we need terms to distinguish that. We need a term that distinguishes governance.
Is that true? Is that true though? We're talking basic structure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We need two terms to distinguish that.
This is fiat.
Acknowledging
this
that.
is fiat, right?
So acknowledging that, we need terms to fix our issue right now. Right now, my issue is
fiat is a social protocol.
the word governance emotionally feels like it's separated abstractions, and the only things that change how things govern are located within governance, right? So you have to go into the government.
Yeah, of course. It's separate.
And use government
it's
rules
separate.
to change government.
Yes.
What we're talking about here,
it cannot be separated.
Is not at all affected by some kind of abstract entity that controls its biddings.
Yeah, and this is just a full coherent representation of a living organism of humans just being
so maybe
being together.
Coherence is the correct term. There's governance, and then there's like
coherent structures.
Yeah. So coherent structures will take the idea of holonics and basically make it scale invariant.
Or the way we define holonic governance is the maintenance of coherence along the membranes. It's going to be all transactional, not transactional. And we are back.
Question: can I do the whole teacher student thing with it? Not elaborate.
Whatever.
I'm just wanted to do a thought experiment with you.
Okay.
Switch the idea of group, which appears above the environment. So you have your environment, your organism, the neural operating system of the organism, social structuring, that creates the group, right? Group appears way above environment. So the thought experiment is this. Take the group, put it back into the environment, call that the environment again, strange loop it. Does that help, like, see more things? That picture of placing the group, the social group dynamic of the group that's been built out of the environment,
Yeah,
back into it.
isn't this like a strange loop
It is. That's what I said.
dynamics, basically?
Yes, I said strange loop.
You have to consider um, your resonance of, you speak your language in your layer. Fine, you can't escape that. But that language affects, like the structure of how your reality, your language is structured, affects the resonance down to every single layer. You can analyze each layer below you halonically, from complexity, fundamental up to significant, and see how well it's taking it or resonating. Like, you can just try look into it, right?
The reason
Sensing, adapting.
But the reason I ask this question is, like, does that help, like, sort of illuminate more, give more nuance, maybe spark insight into what I'm trying to, like, hone in on, like putting the full-blown society
I need to put
back into the environment.
a strange loop section into this. That's what I mentioned it before too.
Do you see what I'm trying to say? I'm saying, like, after everything is said and done, on top of the environment, you interject, or you inject that doing to be the environment.
Yeah, right. So we need to put probably a strange loop here. Hofstadter. And because that shows the proper role of governance, quote unquote, governance structure, is that
part of your environment.
It's that structure, how it has to be, is calculated by assuming that it the environment is taken into account. It's embedded and situated in a context of an environment that it is in.
Right, and strange loop.
This is why it's strange, but it's.
And the strange looping is the fact that social norms, social mythology, and all of that kind of stuff becomes constituents of the environment. And if you are adventurous, you can think back about our discussion about reality and moral, right?
That's right where it's going to go, strange loop stuff.
So that's strange looping. So you have an environment situated with society, filled with a society in it. And of course, the questions of the real and the moral are going to become a fundamental component of that. First of all, there's all this arbitrariness between your, like said, natural environment and social environment, which is going to naturally drive a divide between the real and the moral, the main two categories by which these things are.
Yeah, I kind of get, but you're getting at real and moral as the constructing the objects of our psyche as it goes along.
And it's a consequence of embedding the social operating system into the environment itself in the strange loop.
So this must be broken.
You don't have a fucking logical explanation for it in the sense of, like, calculated math, but you do have this conceptual explanation to qualify it.
It's like the 4 ways of achieving dualism or duality of mind.
A subject I am not familiar with.
Just the generic pointer at the splitting of a unified whole, in other words, a dancer dynamic between two, and instead of pitting against of each other in a dualistic approach. That's what I sense as when people say dualism.
Symbolically, the whole process actually falls on its face, simply because
the process of stupidity.
No. Check this out. It's a very simple problem.
What?
It's a symbolic problem. The problem is that if you have non-duality as a concept at all, it's immediately juxtaposed against duality, and you're ending up in duality.
Sure.
So, symbolically speaking, there's a no.
So
You can't go in anywhere.
there's more than one ways of using the word duality or dualism. But
Right, right.
members can use it in a certain way. Participants can use it in a certain way.
I've just tried to illuminate the fact that the wording itself is problematic.
No,
Because
not anymore between us.
not between us.
Because with the model,
In general.
we just use the model to categorize it. Right?
Yeah, we're not. Our model is. It's not even. It's not non-dual. It's not dual. It's multifaceted. Like it's got as many dimensions as it fucking needs.
Yeah, I
And it
guess
has no.
I'm just kind of fishing
And there's
for
no.
terms of what to call it. It's divided, the divided mind.
We've. I no. Stupid.
Stupid. Yeah.
Spectrum of stupidity is
I
what
said that
is
like
what
a
is
couple
what
minutes ago.
splits the mind. Stupid, not in the sense of I am stupid.
Stupid as in like automation.
Stupefied.
Like a machine is stupid because it's just doing what it's programmed or automated to do.
Right.
That's what makes it stupid. It's actually can be very brilliant in some ways and helpful and all that. Coherent.
Right.
Stupidity isn't
But in
a
the
bad.
context that it's
Stupidity isn't a bad thing.
in which it's fit in, it's just doing one dumb,
Stupidity
mindless task.
Is the best, the highest thing good that civilization has provided us with is stupidity.
Okay.
An extensive catalog of stupidity, and we can do so many things.
To refer back to
stupidly, just academics, philosophy, scientism, religionism, spiritualism, the whole works.
You mean books?
All of it.
You mean books?
But I'm trying to frame stupidity in a positive light.
Well, not that I'm ever wanted it to be. You shouldn't.
It's a skill to be on autopilot, for things to be automated, and saves energy. But in certain contexts, it's good. You don't.
I think this is a confusion of stupidity with what's the word for it?
Well, we need to make a
homeostasis.
little distinction here.
Homeostasis. The desire for most living things to do nothing if they can have the opportunity to. So you see most animals just lays about until they have to actually literally do something.
Right. So doesn't it seem like civilization has accumulated a whole bunch of that ability?
Stupidity would be like the abstract, fake homeostasis. You're still active, but you're only active in things that have nothing to do with you.
So you want to put a negative light on it, and specifically, it'll be in context of like ideological projection. Of this is you're doing an idea and action you're downloading onto the environment. Typically, this is what we would maybe judge as more stupid.
I would judge it based on how much it has to do with you. So basically, if the act has to do with saving face by filling out some paperwork, like what I'm dealing with my insurance and all of that kind of crap.
Mm-hmm.
I have to do this because that's just how these things are done. And I want to save myself from further grief or whatever. Am I doing it for myself? Not really. I'm doing it because yet another piece of paper came my way and I have to fucking read it and sign it and all that jazz and
yeah.
Right, so there's no me in that situation. There's just my body signing letters. There's just mechanics of the process. There's just the me in there is like I don't want to get fucked over. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, but everything I'm doing is dictated by everybody else.
Well, you got to admit, stupidity is highly correlated with automation. That's the only
Okay, yeah,
that's the
that's the
only bridge
thing.
that I was going on, and I feel like it should be
Well, that's the
developed to
thing. Like
make
you're given this
distinction.
like one dashboard with like the one button. Why can't you just like do the button and the fucking fuck off with the dashboard for me? Like, you know, there's just like all these extra stuff that is added on to everything to make everything look whatever. Optics, literally optics.
Are we ever going to finish this essay? Do you think? There's maybe like two
Mm,
sections left.
go for it.
We're just getting into
Yeah,
governance,
like
so
go.
we have to incorporate this strange loop into this section for governance
Mm-hmm.
because that's the only
This
job of any type of whatever you would call a structure is to sustain that vital connection
right.
between the layers.
So I'm allowing it by pushing the top layer of social OS organization right back to the bottom. And now your environment includes every entity from the social OS and the neural OS and the organism by default. So what that means is that the social OS, after the fact, after that first feedback loop, has to encounter not only itself, not only the neural operating system, not only everything, blah, 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 but also its own consequences. So it's kind of like sitting there being emerged on its own, then forced to launder all the information that came before it, and then forced to launder the fact that it laundered the information before it. And all of that is squished right back down to the environment. So,
Yeah,
so not only do the entities become part of the environment, but all the rules of the entities also emerge back up through the stack
potentially, but
to take care
this
of
seems
that.
like a lot, but it's an existing structure that can be tapped like a lightning bolt going through an environment.
And this
At any moment,
and this
it's there as potential.
what's funny about that is that this thrice looping theme, right? That I'm talking about here. So the organism forgets social OS, builds up a social OS. Social OS is built up, it becomes part of the environment. The organism needs to take that into account, builds up a social OS that takes part of the social OS. But
Yeah.
then it has to take part of the consequences of
So
the
you're
social
talking
OS.
about this is like a developmental, like through childhood to maturity thing
That
thing because you're talking about something that has a linear progression to it, right?
then there is another concept that follows this exact same pattern. That's the sentient machine. Build the model, build the model within the model, and then make the model aware of itself. Sort of. What was the pattern there?
Hmm.
It was
I remember it being like polymorphic to language, like multi-domain.
mhm.
Hmm.
No, it all connects.
This.
I'm forgetting the details now. How did I frame this? It's not really important, but uh,
Kind of neat.
it's neat that it repeats itself in different circumstances.
Hmm. But you're talking about the individual responsibility of social society that we take up into
So
ourselves.
it's the computational model. The computational model imbued with model itself. And then what was it?
Synthetic neurological computation.
Mhm. There was a third layer to it, though. I'm just trying to identify how I broke it down before. Anyway,
I
it's
thought it was computation and then
no. Those are the guilds.
yeah.
they follow that pattern. Mm, I forget how I composed it before, but
Sentient machine. We can always
the
come
idea
back to that.
the idea was that you have your computational power as a raw material, a medium. Then you
What I
have
get from that is like a bootstrapping of conscious field, of
yes,
a self-knowing and all-knowing conscious field that is just kind of hovering there.
right.
That's my impression of the sentient machine.
The dashboard was supposed to be an example of it.
It
By
was
the way.
like being able to first have the correct model and then and then to meta on top of that the modeling, like what is language and modeling, and then it's like take this and go up and down every stack, all up
Yeah,
beyond the
you're right.
stack.
You're right. So the pattern was get a
You
computation.
learn yourself,
You have the
then you
computation,
create a model for languages across stack layers,
and
and then you
then
use the sentient machine to interpret each layer up and
not
down.
almost. So computation, the fact of it, just like the ability to automate thinking processes to begin with, like
Sure.
1 + 1 = 2, blah blah blah. Just get that across mechanically. Then you build concepts into the computation that are model. So representations of neurobiological diversity as it pops up, and everything that that precedes it, which works on the very same principles anyway.
We have basically like 3 sections.
And then you need to use that computational model to effectively interpret everything through
Yeah,
the
like
neurochemical.
transform the base that you made, the base of computation you made, transform that base using this language transformation layer into a speaking to each of the other layers to influence or be able to resonate with, or
I'm forgetting details, which is bugging me because I'm feeling like I'm not giving
because
myself
we
justice right
do
now.
and we're supposed to in some ways at a conscious level take up stories or objects or whatever that relate to different layers of our being in some ways, however we construct it. Even socially can get complex in that, right? Um,
There it is. Okay. Raw computational power to capture everything as model, and then there's a reverse there. I just lost it. Fuck.
and then use the model to look at the different types of computation that have to happen along the stack.
Right, kind of like inverted. Um, that doesn't give you like a smart machine.
But this is giving you a governance structure over multiple layers out from a neurochemical APS, uh, NCOS, whatever viewpoint.
Trying to remember the pattern that made sense to me that didn't sound like fucking just random
I
imagination.
think that's some interesting points, though. Um, yep, a sentient machine.
It had to do with the utilization of the model. I just can't remember the fucking detail. It's driving me nuts now.
Well, we're aiming for 6, right? So we got about half hour, yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Let's go. Let's keep going.
Pardon. Um, where were we? Practicing alignment. I forget where we were. So we have some notes here. To align with holonic relationality is to shift from control to participate. Yeah, we did this whole section. At the bottom, yeah, okay. Here's where we're governance. So we're going to add this potentially like sentient machine, or I don't know about that, but it is related was just the fact of the strange loop and taking care of like the structure, if there is any structure to talk about, to speak of governance structures, it's like all it's doing is ensuring and embedding into the environment of like what it is or something. To ensure that smart loop is happening.
So the strange loop.
That we are all part of a sentient machine.
So this is speaking to the second cycle of the strange loop in the archetypical structure that I was talking about. It's the installation of the social norms, the social OS, back into the environment, such that the environment does not only consist of the raw materials that you're into, but also all of the rules and protocols of your tribe, for example.
Right.
If we take it back to a tribe, it's easier to imagine, right?
Yeah, so it's almost like you get the psychosis first and then the neurosis. But you could say that in a pleasant way. You gain your reality first and then your morals later, or something like that. Sure. Voila. Yeah, so that strange loopy stuff definitely has to be here. This is the spot for it. So just assume that that's been introduced. Governance or coherent structures, as we were saying, that resonate with holonic relationality reflect the same principles, which I posit. Good. Reflect the same principles of nested relationships and generative responsiveness that operate on a personal level but scale to collective action. These structures emerge when communities self-organize and manage. I think we read some of this too, but should we skip rather than viewing? Okay, I guess we probably read all this. For example, whatever. I think then we started discussing. Rather than viewing bottom-up initiatives as chaotic or destabilizing, holonic governance sees them as vital adaptive components of complex systems.
I don't like how it keeps it separate, but okay.
Which is separate?
So the governance as an abstract entity is the thing that judges whether it's vital or not.
Right, sees them judging as vital.
Yeah, that's just not it's just not the thing we are talking about.
More dumb framing.
It's wrong interpretation.
Wording. Okay. Yeah. So it's getting at a point, but we need to like massage that to be stated correctly. Nested enterprises reflect holonic principles by layering smaller, localized decision-making bodies within broader frameworks. Each scale operates autonomously yet remains attuned to the feedback loops that sustain coherence across the entire system. For instance, in a disaster response effort, community-led initiatives might address immediate local needs while coordinating with regional and national efforts to ensure long-term recovery. This alignment is evident in grassroots cooperation, citizen assemblies, and trust-building exercises, wherever that is, where effective governance emerges. Right?
just stick that out. I don't want that shit.
Sounds fun.
Just building this. That's charlatanism 101. Get back into the system.
Well, it's tough to like. You have to go through these drafts over and over again. Like this has been massaged so much.
Yeah. Do you know what the image I have from trust building exercises when I
Like
read
calling
that?
back when someone's gonna
No, no, no,
carry you, but they just don't.
no. Slaves getting whipped. Trust, trust,
Trust that
trust until you
I
die.
will whip you. You better trust that. See, now we've
That's
established trust.
right.
Fuckers.
I just like I went for the most extreme, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, so effective governance emerges not from, and I keep having to pull it back from like dissing on imposed hierarchies, like not from. Well, maybe there are some hierarchies, but not imposed. Okay, so they clarified the imposed part, right? The AI saying qualifying it, imposed hierarchies, but from relational webs that adjust and learn over time. So that this is a great point, though. It's just they're not always said right. Complex systems flourish when top-down and bottom-up processes reinforce one another, balancing the creativity of local action with the coherence of collective oversight. That's what danger is.
Wait,
But
yeah, that sounds like
interesting points
that
again.
sounds like committee shit.
Reinforce one another.
It sounds like committee. Like, no, there's feedback, and you adapt to it individually as it occurs, right? So, like, yeah, you may collectively change a
Adapted to at
protocol,
all levels.
but you would have changed the protocol at the moment, right? So you would have mentioned the change in protocol after the fact.
Just at all levels can respond. The whole one.
So it's like saying, okay, what we were trying to do doesn't work for this case. Immediately from the case, we're not trying to do that, and we're going to send feedback to the collective to say that doesn't work for this case at all. Right there, right then and there, right?
Sure.
So you're not going through a bureaucracy of trying to define things and whatnot. You're going
But
to,
maybe you're
okay,
just a troll and you're trying to give them
no,
bad information.
there's just a new protocol coming. Sure. But there's, ideally speaking, there's just a new protocol that comes up. There's an old protocols that has been up. That's the discussion you're going to have after the fact, not before the fact. And you're not going to get people killed by following stupid criteria and then going, oh, what went wrong?
So we do set up a holonic relationality playing field or medium
Mm-hmm.
upon which, sure, politics and stuff can happen as usual, and they will. So when we set up the medium, it seems to be begging for the political as well to be set up in coherent terms
Mm-hmm.
with this foundation.
But it cannot.
So
You can't do that.
this is like, to me, this is like Portal Mountain franchising, just as a soundbite. That would be along the idea.
But again, it cannot be done really. Like you can't franchise it out and sell it. You like the buy-in comes from like a person going, I want to do Portal Mountain, right?
No. Here's the thing, though. Um, Anybody can sell their reputation of their image. So if we create a Portal Mountain logo and we put a stamp on things,
Yeah,
people can simply pay us to say, "Hey, you're cool," and that's all it is.
by pay us, you mean just saying you're cool. Got it.
Pay a franchise fee or whatever. Like that's the idea.
Thumbs up.
But anybody can do it. They can grow and become big themselves and have their own name and their own logo that people pay them to do the same thing, to have their stamp. Right? This isn't like we're the only official ever
Yes.
eternal model or something.
Yes, I mean that's like reflecting back into how we are picking back off of Buddhism.
But I'm just telling
and
you
all
how
of
this
that stuff.
is political in a way.
Right.
That's actually kind of economic, I
So
guess.
so check this out. You can do exactly the same thing without inventing anything new. So there's Portal Mountain, but then there's Buddhism. The difference between the two is effectively nil.
Well, there's lots of differences.
And you can choose Buddhism.
We have technology.
Well, I mean, not in the message. There's literally no difference in what we're trying to express.
Yeah, you won't find like major contradictions. If there are, like, then bring them up and whatever.
Remember, we're removing self from being an intrinsic element of phenomena to begin with. We're incorporating.
Not self,
We're
because you always have to calculate your position in the
no, no.
world,
I'm trying to
impulse to
so
impulse.
I'm trying to bring it back to where it matches with the Buddhist stuff. Buddhist notion has a kind of like a two truths. Um, One is ultimate, one is conventional. So in the ultimate sense, nothing has a self, right? Nothing is self intrinsic. In the conventional sense, there's all of ourselves interacting with each other, trying to figure the fuck out of what the fuck it means to be ultimate, what the ultimate truth
Sure,
is.
two
So
perspectives
that's how it's framed.
juxtaposing a different perspective.
How is that paralleled?
This is the Maslow's deep insight, or Carl Jung's transformative spiritual transformation. That's
I couldn't comment.
I read them. I think it was just
If you think so, sure, but I could not. I could not confirm or deny. Like I really can't. What I do know is though, in the model,
spiritual rebirth.
self appears in narratives. Narratives are fabrications of the mind. So whatever self is, right, it is not brought up as an actual real entity that is intrinsic to anything, but rather it's a constructed entity that is part of the function of narratives.
Yeah, an entity which
So
exists all
we
the
ma-
time, no matter what, regardless of what we think about it. But
so
it is something
so
that
we
is part
match
of us.
so we match in that sense, in the sense that ultimately
It's not to be removed.
there isn't a self outside of a narrative. Truth ultimate. Truth conventional, there are no narratives in which self does not appear. So capture both situations
Sure.
in a different way,
Delusions.
but that we are saying the same thing, right? That there is no intrinsicality of a selfness to anything, because that shit appears in what we call the narrative. And the narrative is so high in the abstraction game that selfness does not mean anything to the layers below it at all. What is a self to a cell? What is a self to any holonic structure, really? It's arbitrary.
Yeah, sure. So that's like the extreme. Like you point to an extreme when you're having a doctrine or something like that. But
That's
the
the
point is a nihilistic
no,
annihilation of the
because
self
again,
or
narrative
ego.
does not lack a self in any case. So there's no nihilistic. It's not a nihilistic approach because while you don't think of things
That's what I
being
kept saying. Self is still there in narrative, anyways, and
right,
that's what we use to orient our body.
right. So in the Buddhist parlance, they just make the can't speak. They make the
Distinction.
distinction between an ultimate reality and a conventional reality. Given that I'm not using reality as part
And
of the
these are
model parlance,
these are
I don't
just
do that. But I use reality and morality for another um, description. But in this case, we're
you
saying
could
the
call
same
it a
thing.
Buddhist ideology, or does it work like that? Or
No, Buddhism doesn't fall into an
how do
ideology.
you
It can.
how do you
It can make ideologies, but it
sure,
isn't one.
how do you categorize it as a system, though?
The same way as a model.
What
In
is it?
Buddhism, we just say Dharma, the teaching, the model. So I just used the same thing and said the model. If we need a Buddha, I just say the archetype. If we need the Sangha, the followers of the Buddha, then we just call them the guild. Archetype, model, guild.
Hmm.
I use exactly the same phraseology, just different words.
Yep.
I there's like nothing's changed. I hope.
No, it's
So like that non-self thing
pretty damn
can be
sweet.
really understood by the fact that self simply appears in narratives. But narratives are not the self. Narratives are the reflections of moments, right? Like you can't assign self to any of it
Yeah,
once you step back into the
there's a
model.
fundamental like horizons of connection between the layers at certain points that it's like you can't strictly identify because there's no causality
Right.
connecting.
So the self becomes an object of narratives, but you're not talking about yourself. You're talking about how you appear to yourself in narratives. That doesn't make a self real, but it doesn't make the self unreal. Because the moments are what's reflection of reality, and the moments include the self. So again, my
There's a
narrative
bridge.
isn't saying
This is
you
along
don't have a
the
self.
hard problem of consciousness. I feel like it's in that same area.
We're looking at representation versus objectivity and
Two
all of that
two
stuff.
sides, unable to navigate the horizon, the divide.
Because you don't have access to it. You don't have access to the objective reality that you'd like to discuss. You only have access to its representation, which is itself subjective. It doesn't mean that the objective reality is missing. It just means that it's inaccessible to
Yeah,
to that formulation.
I liked how we were talking with Dustin, and I can't remember what it was, but um, ultimately, like we can have a thought to harm or judge somebody or transact with them essentially like through punishment,
And
like
then you,
making fun of them or yelling at somebody for looking some way or whatever. And that comes up as an impulse. That's what we consciously become aware of. This whole story of it's
vetoing,
like
yeah,
yes or no. And so this was the power of executive veto that we do have,
executive veto.
which
I love
through
that.
not modeling the executive veto, many of us don't know we have it. So we just go by impulse, which is tragically insane.
Just think about that. Executive veto is the same idea that we had previously about accountability, the record of account, the responsibility, no, I'm using wrong. The
This
record
is
of what you have done, so what you were responsible for.
yeah.
Right. The
I'm trying to
backwards.
remember the exact term
So
too.
responsibility
This is devotional triad.
isn't aimed at the future. It's aimed at the past, which is the difference in our modeling versus typical rhetoric.
Hmm.
And so the record of responsibility mirrors this situation to a T, which I forget what it was. Um,
Me too.
we were discussing how we were talking to Justin,
Pardon.
and
Uh, Dustin. And it's the executive veto was
right.
that we have the ability to be like, nah, no pass. And but you don't actually have an insight into the process of what's giving you that impulse. That's a point I wanted to bring up. Like you don't automatically know how you're just like, nah, not that impulse. And then what can you do? Wait. Another one comes up, right? Like this is kind of a negotiation over time we have with our mind, like
Right.
giving us ideas. And then it's like, no, I can't
Oh,
do that because of this, right?
I think this is worth mentioning. The reason that conversation even came up, we were in the middle of trying to dissect the fact that you cannot force another person to think a certain way to begin with, and then we made the allusion to you have the same relationship with your mind. So your mind will do what it does,
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
and you can't force it to do what you want it to
And this
do,
is
but you
why
can only make
it's
the
so
suggestions
unhelpful to be
to make it attracted to one idea or the other.
yeah, you can in mastery you can resonate.
That's why I use the word attraction.
Mastery is a resonant quality
So
with
what I'm
the
saying
environment.
is like your conversation. Sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off. Um, what I'm trying to say is that the relationship of your own mind and that of another mind is just
Is it so
is
different?
essentially the same. You gotta look at
Yes.
it from the
So
same
it makes
perspective.
no sense to be mad at somebody for holding the views that they hold, just for that, because we all do. It's a we either accept or agree that somebody can be aware and present in potentially transforming their views, right? That's when people come together, like through this some kind of rapport and trust at some point. Um, but like that, people are changing. Like we can view and say, oh, he's just this type of person, or they're that, so I can never connect, right? If we take somebody as a having the ability to change, doesn't that kind of fundamentally shift the dynamic? Like it's either if you do or don't. I feel like when people get
I
cornered
feel
on their
I feel
ideologies,
like one's desire into seeing them change, regardless of how
right?
hands off you
Because
are.
how feel it from their perspective. Someone is just trying to force something down your throat, right?
So what I'm saying is
If
this.
you're in a fighting stance, you don't fucking let that
Mm,
happen,
mm,
right?
a little more basic than this. Again, tying back to my personal experiences over the last couple of months.
Okay,
Even if you have an agenda for said change and you're only working on yourself to make that change, because the change is fundamentally extrinsic to your nature and you're doing it for some other
right.
thing,
Yeah, we brought that up too.
it's
How
not going
having
to.
rules imposed down on you often push you away from the choice you would have naturally made, which was the one that the rules wanted to
Yeah.
conform. But they rules they have an
So personally,
opposite effect somehow,
so
typically.
personally, personally, the takeaway was even if you want a change in another person, you cannot have an agenda.
Like a specific change,
Right.
like what it should be.
Right. Like you can't hold on to
Just
like
like that,
it just
right?
brings
We
up the
should all
same
just be
problem.
growing and being better. Yeah, I can feel that.
So the
It's
hardest
a way of like not judging or wanting to fight and conflict with somebody, but just relating on that. Where are you at now? Have have you been thinking about? Or are you working out now? Or it's
yeah.
just being like more pals, I guess.
So like in my case it was about that song story, right? But the solution to this thing that really hit me right straight up in the face in that conversation, which I'm not going to go into details with, but
Hmm.
you'll understand. Um, my instinct was not to, okay, well, now we got to find a favorite song, right? And baby,
Fix it somehow.
let's,
Like this is the
oh, you
solution.
don't have one, let's figure one out, right? Like that was not how I interpreted the situation and didn't go for it. But all I said is like, holy shit, I need to find a situation in which, right, like a song would be meaningful to her somehow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, make it
Like the
happen if you want.
like she would want to remember me through that experience, and not because I wanted it, but because the experience
Just
itself.
because I guess ideally it's a normal thing for music to be associated sometimes with
Yeah, I'm
like
just using my personal examples.
you often have to make that happen or be music or music people type, or have occasions, music dance, right?
Now, I think you've known this for a long time. I've prided myself on my taste in music. But the thing is, what I ended up doing because of it is belittle everyone else's tastes. I didn't set out to belittle anybody's taste at all.
I see. Yeah.
I just thought my taste in music is so great, I would share it. But what everybody else has heard is that what you listen to is crap, and mine taste is better,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and you should
This
listen to what I listen to instead.
that's another interesting. Yeah, like having that mindset that you are emotionally tied to the result of giving. This is transactional. You're expecting a change. You want someone to change, to accept your view, whatever. Transactional. That's the only possibility you could feel bad about it. If it was a gift that you shared your music, you wouldn't give a flying F, right? Take it or leave it. At least I showed you, right?
Yeah.
Or more. Like that's just because of from the joy of who we are. But this is how to navigate the ego and its market orientation, that transactional. You watch for those impulses, and you have to catch it and say no. But you have to realize you have an executive veto, right? And this is just a growth, maturity, whatever. It makes sense why you would need to know about it.
Well,
Once you know about it,
what's interesting about this veto is its really close connection and relationship to the moment diagram, the small diagram of where one moment transforms itself into the next moment.
right?
So you have the inputs, you have the proximity complex reaction, or proximity based complex reaction, and you have your output narrative, which feeds back
Right.
into the next moment. So that veto executive function that you're talking about, right, is only really found in that one tiny little speck of an instance in which moments are occurring, which fly by you
Right.
in a moment. like like
Yes.
your perception of time is effectively divided by those moments, right? Like that's what moments mean in this model. So the entire movement of time is prescribed by the passing of this moment. So it doesn't matter how long it takes in seconds or
Yeah.
milliseconds or whatever.
The main point would be that a moment comes by where you have the ability to accept or reject it, and in that moment,
The
an
premise.
entire narrative and worldview of like this is where we're at, body, and this is where we can be right now. If we execute this action, this will be what the narrative is going to happen, right? So that's your moment to take executive veto and be like, no,
So what's
if you find a proper reason
so
not to, like transactional thinking.
if you're accepting that, then you're talking about the same division of time that the Buddha talked about. Buddha being scripturally recorded stuff.
Okay.
The proposition is that there's a linear time, the thing that brought the moment to you, because causally, and then
Yeah, sure.
there's a synchronic time,
Yep.
the veto power that you are having over that moment, whether you exercise it or not, and that synchronic thing can just remove the
Yeah.
linearity one way or the other.
Right, right, right. Because you're saying that the executive veto is actually coming in and bubbling up and intersecting this whole thing as the impulse comes to you. And that's how it becomes a vetoed impulse.
Right.
So even this impulse isn't you yourself are sitting there waiting to accept or not. It's something you've worked on to learn about and model, right?
Yeah, and then you have a
And
synchronic
practice. Yeah.
situation in which you can
Good point.
veto it or not.
That'd be
So
a good point.
every chain of causality is actually more like a web, if you will, right? Because the veto power itself comes from narratives of the model. So another moment by moment by moment by moment narrative is formulating itself. And then you have that hyper narrative intersections. It looks like a crossword puzzle.
Right. Yep.
So those boxes that are intersected between both narratives, what do you think those are? That's where the veto occurs. So you have all the, like, if narratives are boxes that follow boxes that follow boxes that follow
Sure. Yeah.
boxes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then hyper narratives are crisscrossing
Well,
boxes.
exactly. It's like setting up a protocol for what would constitute something that I should be vetoing. And this could be something like a transactional logic where I'm about to punish somebody for not doing this or whatever.
But
That
then
and
another
once
narrative about punishment comes into play and says whether I should or should not punish at all, and it could create a distinction point between whether you do proceed with said punishment or do not.
right,
Is that
but
making
I'm
sense?
suggesting with a model type thing, you would meditate on such an object like don't punish.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We're saying the same thing.
Good, good, and just we gotta book it on out of here. I did just pulled up that.
Yeah, this is the transitional point. So what I've been saying is that
Come on, zoom in. So where
oh, I forgot about foreground and background.
it's got to happen somewhere in this cycle. This is a circular cycle. You could see it as this is the top from moving to the right, and then it loops back down at the bottom, back to through sound bites, and
So the
through
soundbite
the
is the
cycle
so
again.
you can call the soundbite the shape of the moment, like it's it's qualitative
It's something to be
elements.
calculated. Your mind
The thing,
is working in a
it's
reality.
the reality. Foreground background talks about the mimplex, if you recall, and the way we used to describe it is peripheral versus non-peripheral vision. So if your eye is operating in a sense of like I'm focused on that
Right.
point, then there's all this
Yeah.
background information that feeds
So
into
you
it.
have you're able to have a focal main area of attention, but also have all the connection points out just to reference the whole kind of reality
Mhm.
tunnel without actually moving over to those.
Right.
It's just kind of reference to the context.
We're also noting that there might be a dysmorphism in that situation. So what you pick out as your foreground out of the background may not be the correct thing. Think optical illusion type stuff, right? So there's that problem. We then go through the
Okay,
calculation of our
like for example, reality, as in stupidity.
yeah
That's that being your foreground, framed
yeah.
in those terms. It can be perilous.
We then go into the sympathetic self-reference. So this is the
Proximity complex.
yeah,
Foregrounding. So how does the subject of this moment relate to me specifically?
right. Empathetic context refers to how you take the situation to be in the first place. So how you read your context, how you read the background. So the self-reference here is sympathetic because you're not judging what you are in the thing. You're judging another person. Empathetic context is you're the universe in which said self-reference is operating. Your mind, your projection of the reality of the situation, everything to do with how the universe is constructed, the
All right, you're
background,
talking about empathetic
yeah,
context.
context. The background that you asserted provides the reality that you are empathizing with, and then whatever you observe in that moment, the object of your observation, is sympathized with within that context. So you become the universe in which the object exists. Your brain becomes a simulator, if you want to put it that way.
Right. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. This machine kind of like
Right.
going from moment to moment, kind of like structurally clicking from
Right.
this
So,
happened, now this happened.
so you
now
have
this
a
happened.
universe and you have a thing that happens in the universe, and that's the division I'm trying to point at.
Right, where I would expect a correlation between foreground and background. We would see something similar, correlation of whatever sympathetic self-reference is.
And you do see
the
it.
empathetic is the referent to all the tunnel, basically.
But the problem lies here.
Dysmorphism.
Just before you get to those two spaces in which this object feeds into its own universe, you may have had a discrepancy between the context in which it's actually appearing and what it is.
Yeah.
Right? All of that creates affect. So this merging.
This is the normal feeling of like what I thought isn't what happened, because otherwise everything would be great right now.
I like this, I don't like this. Pain and pleasure.
It's a sign that our world isn't, we don't understand our world properly.
And then the affect response comes back out to the next output of for narrative, to give you more signals, to give you more symbols, it's just the existing vibrations of signaling of the brain. Those signals feed right back into the system, create new symbols, create new memes, create new things, create another foreground and background situation.
Wait,
another soundbite, sorry, and it all feeds.
Where did
right
we
back.
go? We went to self-narrative, I assume, because I gapped out by the time you started describing.
Sorry, affect becomes a quality of this. So as soon as the sympathetic self-reference goes back into its context, you either like what's happening or you don't like what's happening, all of that stuff. That forces the self-narrative to continue.
So you can create trails in the jungle, in the forest, of either hatred or greed for things that go on, and these become self-related narratives through that affect structure.
Creating a new soundbite that restarts the process.
Right. Like, I hate this person or something.
Right. And you'll notice that the soundbite not only informs the foreground, not only informs the background, right? But it also feeds into what the self-reference is. So it ties in the meaning of what it is that you're being.
We're identifying with our own reality as it's fed to us.
So like, so this tells you what you're focused on. This tells you what you're focused on means. So the soundbite tells you, pay attention to it. The sympathetic self-reference says, because it's bad, or because it's good. See what I'm saying there?
Mm-hmm.
Then the soundbite also feeds into your background. So every element of the context of that is getting fed into that.
So this is an ongoing process of accumulation of soundbites.
So this sets it up structurally, and this says, oh, that's good, that's bad. And then you're fitting the self-reference that's been good or bad into your context that's good or bad. And that fitting is good or bad, and your affect is affected by all of those parameters, and the eventual self-narrative, you see what I'm saying, it starts simple, but it's getting really fucking complex because of it.
Yep. So this is people through life accumulating effective paths through their APS jungle.
Yes. Hi, honey.
For in an outro, we're basically out of here. So, any last words, final words before we depart?
We need to go.
Yeah, we need to go. That's about it.